Chapter 191. The situation was now clear. The one clashing with Hades was the rumored goddess of the nether moon, an ancient deity who had long resided in the spirit realm. However, before proceeding, the goddess decided to first understand the situation here. "Excuse me, are you the river god of this place?" Her tone was calm. Looking at the aged visage of the ferryman before her, Hestia didn't show any arrogance due to the difference in strength. On the contrary, she was quite polite. It was her first time at the Acheron River, as well as her first encounter with this Styx River ferryman. Although the ferryman's strength was not formidable, the Styx River seemed to be linked with the power of the underworld, giving birth to a special force. This force was not strong in itself, but it shared a part of the essence of the underworld. It could cause all things to sink, making any being that came into contact with it dwindle in their obsessiveness through suffering. Neither deities nor mortals could avoid it. Only on the ferryman's wooden boat could one sidestep this force. Of course, this power definitely could not affect her personally. After all, the underworld was not the spirit realm, and even though the River of Sorrow shared part of the essence of the underworld, it also wasn't capable of touching the great symbols. "As you can see, Your Highness Hestia, I am Charon, the ferryman of the River of Sorrow, currently serving Lord Hades by guarding the portals between the nether and the upper worlds." Charon rose from the wooden boat and bowed deeply. "May I know your commands? The strife in the underworld has affected the surface. I come by the Divine King's order to investigate the cause. What do you know about this conflict?" Originally planning to head directly to the center of the underworld, Hestia felt, just as she crossed the gates of the underworld, that the aura of the battling sides suddenly calmed down. At the same time, a somewhat peculiar sensation drifted through the underworld. "I only know that Lord Hades has long desired to meet with the goddess of the nether moon and the goddess of oaths, but to no avail. As for the events that happened today, I am unaware, Your Highness." Shaking his head, Charon's aged face didn't show the malice he often reserved for mortals, only respect and submission. Because of his godhood's influence, he actually reveled in bringing pain to others. But when facing the elder sister of the Divine King, he still knew what he ought to do. "I see. Then I shall go and see for myself, thank you." Hestia nodded slightly, surmising that perhaps her brother wished to fully integrate the power of the underworld, resulting in a dispute with a neighbor. Without further ado, Hestia prepared to depart. But the next moment, that previously faint and peculiar aura suddenly intensified. The entire underworld seemed to rejoice, and in an instant, even she was affected by that unknown power. The goddess stood still. In that moment, she seemed to forget how she had come to be there, her purpose for venturing to the underworld, and she almost forgot how to control her own power. Her divine power fluctuated abnormally for a moment. Fortunately, it was brief and Hestia quickly shook off the influence, but it still alerted her instantly. That is, with a serious expression, she felt wary of this special power. While its intensity was limited, like the Acheron River before her, it seemed to share the nature of another being. Consequently, it possessed a high level of rank, making even the goddess not exempt from its effects. "Your Highness, it appears a new Styx River is being born. Perhaps because he was also a member of the Styx, Charon wasn't more severely affected than the potent goddess. He recognized why this strange aura was familiar to him. A similar phenomenon had occurred when he was born. Yet there was a difference. As one of the Styx rivers, the ferryman could clearly feel that this new Styx River, like the Styx itself, was seemingly not solely under the influence of the underworld. At the other end of it, a vast and majestic world was connecting to the underworld like Tartarus, through the power of the new Styx River. What is this? Compared to the two deities at the edge of the underworld, above the fields of truth, Liana and Hades were equally surprised. Hades's figure was somewhat disheveled, but he was not gravely injured. Earlier, even though he had the upper hand, Liana soon realized after a brief exchange that she seemed unable to handle him currently. This was not because the power of the spirit realm was insufficient, or even that it was lesser than half of the underworld's sovereignty, but because she herself had encountered a bottleneck. There was plenty of power she could still draw upon, but Liana was no longer able to bear it. Empowered by the force of the interface, Liana, with her divine power just below the 18th level, stood at the peak of mighty divine power, with greatness just one step away. Yet as the goddess of the Nether Moon, she was not the master of this world. She could not touch the sphere of greatness before her divine power had reached its zenith, a force she was temporarily unable to bear. In this situation, Liana and Hades were like two students who were already excellent but had also received extra credit. Although one had 500 points and the other only 50, faced with a test out of 100 points, both good students could achieve full marks. However, fortunately, she had a divine artifact. If in the realm of divine power, Hades, bolstered by half the laws of the underworld, stood equal to Liana, in the realm of divine artifacts, the Netherworld King's helmet of invisibility paled in comparison. Chapter 192. However, as the exchange of blows continued, something unexpected occurred. When the power of the spirit realm served as a medium through Liana and collided with the authority of the underworld, a strange change began to emerge. In the fourth layer of the spirit realm, the divine artifact used for erasing the memories of living beings suddenly collapsed of its own accord, forming a special fountain. Originally, it merely held memory, but now it had gained an additional power. A new Styx river. With a grave expression, Hades, the rightful ruler of the underworld, instantly understood what had happened. The birth of a Styx river required a cause. The Styx was born when the authority of the world's oaths was delegated. Acheron came into being because the underworld had a master, the river of fire was drawn by his own hand, and the scene before him was clearly a resonance between some power of the spirit realm and the underworld, for the fourth Styx river was about to emerge. This would normally be a positive event, just as the birth of the natural gods signified the reinforcement of the current laws in the previous two epochs. An increase in the number of Styx rivers would also strengthen the power of the underworld, but at the moment Hades was not the least bit happy. Because Hades felt that, unlike the river of fire and the river of sorrow, this new Styx river seemed, similar to the first Styx, not to be under the jurisdiction of the underworld's laws. Your Majesty. As the signs of the birth of the Styx river manifested, the confrontation between the two principal gods also came to a halt. Liana looked at the changes with some confusion, while Hades contemplated how to end this inexplicable battle. Taking this opportunity, the Naiad, who had been watching with a heart full of terror, finally overcame her fear and approached Hades' side. Your Majesty, your divine palace just now. I can see it, and this is not the place for you to be. A twitch appeared at the corner of his eye, and his tone was somewhat stiff. A palace was of little concern to Hades, but as his dwelling place, it represented his dignity. And yet, it was clear to anyone with eyes that he now had no way of handling the goddess of the Nether Moon. He couldn't even manage a retaliatory strike of equal measure. Her abode was probably inside the spirit realm. And now that Minta had mentioned it again, it truly irritated Hades. This nymph might not have any duplicitous intentions towards him, but she was certainly not the sharpest tool in the shed. Sigh. Let's end it here, Princess Liana. I have witnessed your power, and you should understand that even in the underworld, I have some strength. Speaking slowly, Hades looked towards the beautiful goddess in front of him. In terms of appearance, she was not inferior to the renowned Hera, though their styles were different. I won't bring up the past again, and as for my divine palace that you destroyed, consider it an apology to you. Let's not continue this meaningless battle. With an unchanged expression, Liana had to admit that this foreign impostor god indeed had some strength. Perhaps she could suppress him with the power of the divine artifact, but in the underworld, it would be difficult to truly subdue Hades. Among the original 18 angels of the spirit realm, their attitudes towards beings of the outside world could roughly be divided into 3 categories. The ignoring faction believed their existence or non-existence had nothing to do with them. The destructive faction believed those who did not believe in the Creator deserved to be eradicated. And there were those who believed in redemption, who felt that the beings of the outside world were merely lost and needed to recognize the greatness of the Lord for education. Liana actually fell between the last 2 categories. She believed that mortals could be educated, but these false gods were difficult to change. However, she was not as extreme as the second category, so it wasn't to the point where she felt the need to strike upon sight. "You call this place Fields of Truth?" With a cold voice, looking at this place that proclaimed itself truth, an idea faintly formed in Liana's mind. If the Lord's name could be glorified, it seemed that an almost immortal god was not that important after all. "Yes, this is the name I have chosen for the core of the underworld. Is there anything amiss?" His expression became guarded, for after the previous incident, Hades had vaguely realized that this goddess born of the spirit realm might have many beliefs that weren't quite the same as those of the contemporary gods. Without replying, Liana smiled as she looked at the vast gray plain. Hades was somewhat surprised. It was the first time he had seen the goddess of the nether moon smile, but the next moment, he realized something was wrong. In front of him, Liana's fingertips lightly touched the air, and an illusory river flowed out from the void. Perhaps due to a destiny's alignment, as soon as it appeared, it was immediately accepted by the underworld. Emitting an essence that made all things forget their past, one end began near the well of reincarnation, stretching infinitely towards the gray land. "What are you doing?" Divine power surged, and Hades was ready to intervene. But once again, he found to his frustration that the dominion of the underworld did not repel her. Protected by the power of the silver mirror space, the illusory river cut right through the heart of the underworld, from the site of the old divine palace in the Fields of Truth, splitting this central area of the underworld in two. Even the river extended further, disrupting some tributaries of the River of Fire and probing towards the gates of the underworld. Finally, it halted just behind the River of Sorrow. Only then did Hades notice a familiar figure had appeared there. From now on, this will be Erinyes' River of Oblivion, and it should ease her burden somewhat. The souls of all beings shall flow from here into the spirit realm, cleansing themselves of their past along the way, before being reborn into samsara. And wherever the river flows, all beings will bear witness to this, thereby recognizing the greatness of the spirit realm. Pleased with her own arrangement, a river originating from the fourth layer of the spirit realm and situated at the very center of the 7 layers naturally should pass through the axis of the underworld. Turning to face Hades, Liana's mood seemed much improved. She remembered visiting Lane and Cronus a few times. Since everything of the Lord was right, naturally the goddess of the nether moon should learn from it. This is probably what the Lord wanted me to learn by dealing with this alone. Feeling somewhat joyful, her tone became much milder. Looking at Hades in front of her, Liana spoke with an even voice. "The angels of the spirit realm are loyal only to the Creator of all things. This is the first time, and also the last, I will tell you this. Furthermore, guard the banks of the River of Oblivion well. Do not let the souls be stolen by other lives. For the fewer souls the spirit realm receives, the less power the light within the nether moon will have. Are you still willing to uphold our previous covenant?" Ignoring his sister far off at the gates of the underworld, Hades was surprised by Liana's words. He had thought that due to the conflict between them, their previous agreement no longer mattered. "I dislike you only out of personal distaste, but it does not concern the covenant you just made." Liana had been most influenced by 2 beings since her birth. One was Lane, and the other was Themis, and most of her understanding of the outside world came from the two. The latter needs no explanation, while the former, aside from playing a few word games when she was still weak, always kept his word. So as Liana said, as long as Hades did not first break his promise, she did not mind using the power of dominion to add some of the nether moon's light to the underworld. Chapter 193 Puppets, Sailboats, and Chessboards. If that's the case, I will make sure the souls in this River of Oblivion are well taken care of. Although the underworld is vast, and the newly born Styx River has visibly begun to stretch out its tributaries, Hades found overseeing it a trivial matter. After all, the gods have already confirmed it. The belief born from solitary souls, compared to their living days, hardly exists. Hence, it seems that no one would come to snatch such things in large quantities. Even if left unattended, it's unlikely anything would happen. It had better be so. Tilting her head, Liana noticed a red light approaching in the distance. It seemed to be a deity from above, but it would take a considerable amount of time to reach here. The underworld may not be as vast as the surface, but it had now expanded significantly. Starting today, the unclaimed magic power released by the Nether Moon will triple, as promised. As for how to build your undead kingdom, that will be your own affair. With the silver mirror in hand, Liana did not linger any longer. Under Hades' gaze, her figure gradually became ethereal and finally disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the expanding Nether Moon slowly returned to normal, yet the magic power contained within its moonlight had indeed tripled. Though the concentration had only tripled, the impact on the emergence of Wraith intelligence was more than tenfold. Now, the biggest issue had become how to acquire as many skeletal remains from above, especially those of humans. Bronze humanity, alas, they have much life left. Muttering to himself, his intended goal eventually materialized, but looking at the Styx River beneath his feet and the empty fields of truth, Hades's heart was filled with a complex mix of emotions. No, it wasn't entirely empty. It seemed the goddess of the Nether Moon had shown some mercy to those wraiths who worshipped her, so despite the havoc wreaked by the previous two deities' skirmish, they were still relatively unharmed. The only truly unfortunate victims in the fields of truth were his own palace. You go find someone to rebuild my divine palace. Construct it on the eastern side, a bit farther from the River of Oblivion. With a casual command to his maid, Hades immediately transformed into a gray light and darted towards the edge of the underworld where Hestia approached. Apart from those with authority in the underworld, it was no easy task for other deities to travel from the underworld's border to its center, and he couldn't just wait idly at the heart of the underworld for Hestia to arrive. Soaring through the air, Hades felt a bit of a headache coming on. He now needed to figure out a way to deal with his sister, preferably without letting her find out what he was up to. Today's struggle would certainly have drawn the attention of the Olympian gods, and Hades didn't want them to become aware of the Wraith's existence prematurely. The underworld had been of little interest before because it lacked benefits, but if it suddenly possessed value, it would inevitably attract the gods' scrutiny. Let's go with that. Let them laugh for a while. After flying for a while, Hades finally thought of a good strategy. The best way to cover something up wasn't to hide it clumsily, but rather to distract people with another matter, far more captivating. A story like the god of the underworld fell in love with the goddess of the Nether Moon, was spurned, and suffered a severe blow with his palace wiped away, would serve well. As for whether this would make him the laughingstock of the Olympian gods, Hades no longer cared much. A moment's honor or disgrace was trivial. When lacking power, he could relinquish even the divine king's throne, let alone a small matter of reputation. Once he completed his plan, those deities would naturally learn to keep silent. He adjusted his expression, trying to look as pitiful as possible. In the distance, Hestia's silhouette was now faintly visible. The next day, seismic disturbances ceased near Mount Olympus, affecting some oceans at most. Under the suppression of present powers, the bronze humanity's domain remained as peaceful as ever. Last night, in a remote corner of the tribe, Andy had waited very late for the big sister, who had left halfway through to finally return, leaving the young boy quite famished. But this wasn't what Lane had asked for. He wasn't there to enforce laws and mistreat children. There was no intent to test Andy, and even the children of the bronze humanity couldn't truly be considered weak. In fact, after realizing that Liana had somehow gotten into a fight with Hades for unknown reasons, Lane had signaled that it was okay to start eating, but Andy had insisted on waiting. Little Andy was warm-hearted and kind. He didn't want the big sister to eat leftovers alone, so he was determined to wait for Liana's return. Lane could only sigh at this decision. Different folks, different strokes. Freed from the constraints of thought, the personalities among the bronze humanity had also become varied. There were arrogant ones like Priest Asen, some who sneered and mocked Lane's request for shelter, and naturally there were those like Andy who was full of kindness towards everything. Lane, however, did not know whether Andy could maintain such kindness when he grew up, as the bronze humanity faced their destined end. Maybe he could, but more likely he could not, yet Lane didn't care. He wasn't there to select the virtuous, and whether Andy became good or evil in the future was immaterial. Their fate was only intertwined for the time that Lane remained in the human tribe. Chapter 194. As for the future, that would be his own business. So, Liana, how did you end up fighting with Hades? Sitting at a small table in front of the house, Lane was holding a small knife, carving a wooden figure. On the table beside him lay many different kinds of wood carvings. They were exquisitely lifelike and looked no different from real people. Although Hades doesn't seem to be as content with his lot as he appears, he also doesn't seem like someone who would provoke you intentionally. He didn't ask much yesterday, but now that he had some free time, Lane was a bit curious. Since he had let Liana handle the matter on her own, he naturally wouldn't be peeking and watching all the time. As a result, he was completely clueless about how Hades had managed to offend his angel. However, thinking about Liana's usual attitude towards the deities of the current world, it didn't seem surprising that they would end up fighting. He said some very annoying things, so I wanted to teach him a lesson, Liana said after a moment's silence. Lane was somewhat surprised at her reply. The reason was not important, but it was the first time he saw Liana hesitate when facing her own problems. However, he only pondered briefly and did not continue to probe. As the Lord of the Spirit Realm, he respected every Spirit Realm life's right to independence, as long as it did not concern his own interests. If that's what you wanted to do, then go ahead. But remember, next time, before you act, think whether you can achieve your goal and what you will have to sacrifice for it. If it were me, I'd either not take action at all, or be prepared to deal with the trouble if I did. As his hands continued carving, Lane, as he had said, seldom resorted to violence. Every time he did act, it was with a purpose. In contrast, if not for the accidentally created River of Oblivion, Liana could be said to have fought for no reason and gained almost nothing from it. All right, go take care of your business. You've drawn a river for Erinis. It's only right to have a word with her about it. Lane waved his hand dismissively, and Liana, pressing her lips together, obeyed and left. Though she didn't say much, the goddess of the Nether Moon could still see that Lane was less than pleased with how the event had unfolded. But Liana felt it was simply because she wasn't strong enough, able to achieve the goal and prepared to solve problems. Clearly, had she already reached greatness, she could have easily solved all the problems she faced yesterday. Still not enough experience. But of course, confined to the spirit realm since birth, how could she look at the world with a more rational perspective? Even the gods of chaos are no exception. With a slight sigh, Lane decided to put aside Liana's affairs for the moment. He looked up just as Anne's small figure was approaching from the end of the path outside the courtyard. On his back, a large basket was filled with firewood, which appeared to be quite heavy. Over the years, even though the blessings of deities have allowed the bronze humanity to live comfortably, that was only comparative. In any case, the humans of the present were still in a primitive and barbaric era, and when it came to the level of civilization, they were even inferior to the once golden race. During thousands of years of development, the golden humanity had already mastered all the skills passed down in the civilization slate, only lacking further innovation. In contrast, a mere decade or so was far from sufficient for the new bronze humanity to learn the legacies of their predecessors. Therefore, in such an era, even with the fire that drove away calamities, they still needed to cut wood. Even with the evergreen fruit trees, they also needed to herd cattle and sheep. Andy was no exception. Early today, he had gone to a forest more than a dozen miles away to prepare fuel for the coming days. "Big brother, I'm back," Andy announced as he entered the courtyard and put down the bamboo basket loaded with firewood, wiping off the sweat on his face. If this scene were witnessed by people from later times, they would definitely accuse Lane of exploiting a child. But to the big and small in this courtyard, it seemed perfectly normal. Lane felt it was justified, for what he was about to give Andy was far more valuable than what the latter had given. Andy also felt it was justified, for he realized that Lane knew a lot. Andy wasn't stupid. He had his guesses about Lane's identity. Perhaps this big brother was a skilled craftsman. You're back. That's good. Come here, Andy, Lane said, finishing the final stroke and examining the wooden doll in his hand. Perfect in appearance. The inside was also filled with organs, blood vessels, and meridians indistinguishable from those of a real body. He hadn't used any extraordinary power. This was the pinnacle of mortal's craftsmanship, enhanced by his godhood. Of course, without a transcendent physique, it would have been absolutely impossible to master the technique of projecting force through the exterior without damaging the wood. Come on, pick one, Lane beckoned to Andy. On the stone table at the moment, there were varied dolls, including a small wooden sailboat that didn't yet exist in this era, and a chessboard complete with diverse chess pieces. These were the results of Lane's carvings today. Of course, they were not divine artifacts with extraordinary effects. They were simply ordinary wood carvings. Chapter 195. I choose one. With a mixture of surprise and hesitation, Andy, still a child at first glance, had taken a liking to these various toys. But he knew such exquisite items must be rare, and he didn't know if he should accept this gift. Yes, of course, but they are not toys. Tapping the table with his fingers, Lane said with a smile, "In fact, I am going to teach you a skill, as a way to repay you for the disturbance these past few days, as well as the rent for the time I will be staying with you." Skill. You are a priest. Blurted out, though not knowing what rent was, Andy understood what skills were. Admiration gleamed in his eyes, and he inadvertently began to speak respectfully. Though bronze humanity remained primitive, with the development of the tribes, a hierarchy had begun to emerge. Undoubtedly, the priests were the highest-ranking individuals under the Creator. They could communicate with deities, follow alongside Prometheus, receive teachings from the Creator, and convey his will. Besides the priests, the next tier was the craftsmen. All the skills humans possessed came from the old times, from Prometheus's teachings, and clearly, the forethinker could not teach the tens of thousands of humans following him at the same time. Moreover, different skills required a varied number of people. Unlike herding or farming, bronze smithing, temple relief carving, and some tool-making methods were knowledge only a few needed to master. There was no need to disseminate it to all of humanity. In such situations, Prometheus came up with a solution. He selected the most intelligent among humans, who were also the predecessors of the priests. The forethinker sequentially taught different skills to them, then had them pass these on to other suitable humans. From then on, priests, those with special skills, and ordinary bronze humanity formed the most primitive three classes. However, due to the presence of the Creator, although the former had a higher status, there were yet no oppressive relations among people. In Anne's eyes, he had originally thought that Lane was the second type, but now he realized that Lane, claiming to teach him skills, might very well be the first type. After all, only a priest has the qualification to impart knowledge. Well, a priest, huh? Strictly speaking, you could say that. Nodding lightly, no one had ruled that he couldn't be his own priest. So, although the Bronze Humanities tribe didn't have a temple belonging to him yet, Lane accepted the role. As for the fact that no one recognized him before, it wasn't that much of a concern. Even if he couldn't use divine power, a little mental suggestion was enough to make others overlook this issue. So, do you want to learn? Yes. Although many thoughts flashed through Anne's mind at this moment, perhaps the big brother in front of him was, just like the gods test humans with the amount of sacrifice, previously testing whether he was a helpful child. Maybe the uncle living next door would regret it. He actually rejected the stay of a divine priest. But no matter how many thoughts he had, Andy agreed eagerly and without delay. Since that's the case, Andy, which one will you choose? With a light click on the table, Lane asked again. But this time, Andy didn't look at the wood carvings on the table with the attitude of viewing toys. At this moment, they represented the inheritance of skills behind them, and they were likely just learned from the Creator by the priest before him. After all, these items in front of him were different from every skill that Andy had known before. Then, great priest, what knowledge do these wood carvings each represent? Although he liked the look of each one, since Lane said he could only choose one, Andy naturally had no reason to be greedy. He simply had no prior experience with these and didn't know what these things were. Facing Anne's question, Lane didn't plan to keep any secrets. He first pushed the chessboard in front of him, along with the set of chess pieces on it. The first one is chess. The wooden chessboard was filled with stone chess pieces, each with a different style. There were king, queen, as well as minister, knight, slave. Current bronze humanity undoubtedly couldn't grasp these concepts, but they didn't need to. After all, the rules of the chess game were just that. Someone who doesn't know what chariot, horse, cannon in Chinese chess are will not be prevented from learning the game's rules. It's something for entertainment. It can bring joy and satisfaction to people. During its use, people will follow special rules to command the chess pieces on either side, letting them battle each other on the board. Whoever captures the opponent's king first wins the game. People can enjoy the happiness of victory, and if they wish, they can also prepare a small prize beforehand. Speaking with a smile, Lane explained what chess was, trying to make it understandable to Andy. If you choose this, then I will teach you how to make the chess equipment, how to define different game rules, and the key to winning against your opponent. Hesitating for a moment, as interesting as it sounded, Andy felt that chess didn't seem as useful as skills like smithing tools or brewing nectar. After all, humans at the time didn't have much demand for entertainment. What about this one? Feeling that the first option wasn't quite to his liking, Andy glanced at Lane's expression, thinking he was being covert, and then pointed to some other items on the table. This one is a boat, a tool for traveling on water. Still smiling, Lane reached out and picked up a wooden basin filled with water, then put the wooden boat on it. Chapter 196 Script. This is a ship. It can carry hundreds or thousands of humans sailing on the sea, as well as allow people to explore islands and catch fish. If you choose this, then I will teach you how to make ships of different sizes, the skills needed to navigate the seas, and the ability to identify directions by the stars and compass. Having placed several chess pieces on the wooden ship, Lane blew gently at the sails, and the little ship began to circle the rim of the wooden basin. Watching this scene, Andy felt some temptation. The tribe was located next to a river, so he knew it was difficult for humans to stay in water for long periods. But with this thing called ship, all these problems could be solved. Yet, after hesitating for a moment, Andy still shook his head. Priest, I remember the Creator once said that the great divine king forbade humans from approaching the ocean. Exploring islands, catching fish, all sounded very useful, but the premise was set upon the ability to step into the ocean. Small rivers didn't require these. To prevent the secrets related to faith from leaking prematurely, Zeus not only refrained from building a temple for his foster parents, promoting their names, but he also set the ocean as a forbidden zone for humans. Mortals could not defy the commands of the divine king, so this thing named ship naturally had no place to be used. Then let's look at the third option, but this is the last one. After being rejected twice in a row, Lane showed no sign of irritation. The table was now considerably emptier, with only various sizes of figurines remaining. Some were tall, some were boldly stout, and they included both men and women. However, for some reason, Andy always felt that they looked a bit like the statues in the temple. The third one is drama, and these in front of you, I call them puppets. A complete drama needs actors, but puppetry is different. It doesn't need assistance from others. It is a form of theater that only you can perform. As he spoke, Lane's fingers quivered slightly. Without any extraordinary power, the puppets in front of him suddenly came to life. Andy was startled at first, but upon closer observation, he quickly discovered the secret within. Threads, thin and transparent, extended from Lane's fingertips, binding the joints of the puppets. A slight wiggle of the fingers would make the puppets dance along. Reenact the past, fabricate lies. You can substitute the lives that exist or don't exist in reality with puppets, and perform scenes that have occurred in the past or only exist in your imagination. If you choose this, then I will teach you how to select materials to carve, how to make threads, and how to arrange a play. You can choose to use them to praise the gods or to enact the world in your heart. However you decide, it's entirely up to your own thoughts. Praise the gods. Enact the world? His eyes brightening, Andy couldn't help but repeat Lane's words. Chess and sailing were interesting, but they both had their disadvantages. In comparison, drama not only had value, but was also fun. Watching the puppets dancing on the table, a sincere longing sprouted in Anne's young heart. Although he hadn't tried it yet, he was already fond of the feeling. Just a flick of the fingers and everything could unfold just as he imagined, which sounded extraordinary. I choose the third. Are you sure? With a smile, Lane's expression was somewhat profound. Once you've made your choice, you can't change it. I will teach you the knowledge related to your choice in order to repay your hospitality for these days and in the future. But after you've learned, the rest of the journey is up to you to walk. I'm sure. He nodded affirmatively. Among the three choices, the last one was undoubtedly the most in line with Anne's wishes. To learn skills, especially such interesting ones, he felt truly blessed by the gods at that moment, to have encountered such good fortune. All right then, since that's the case, we'll start our lessons tomorrow. But before that, go and chop some more wood. Smiling, Lane pointed to the wooden frame that Andy had just set down. As a beginner, while learning knowledge is important, practice is also indispensable. Ah? All right then. Despite a bitter expression, Andy picked up the bamboo basket and put it on his back again. If chopping more wood meant learning a skill, who knows how many people would be eager to do it. With the basket on his back, he walked out of the small courtyard, while behind him, Lane caressed the puppet in his hand as he watched Anne's retreating figure. If only the audience were considered, Anne's choice wasn't particularly good. Humans are currently forbidden to sail, but in the future, the sea will undoubtedly become an indispensable part of human life, and even at the end of the Bronze Age, there would have been a place for it. The current humans weren't yet talking about spiritual entertainment, but in the future, chess would definitely become a more widely spread form of entertainment than drama. But Lane thought that perhaps for Andy, his choice had no errors. After all, there were still gods in this world, and Lane wouldn't treat him the way he did Hecate. Thinking like this, some choices that look good might actually be a mistake. And there's him, gently tapping on the table. Lane's gaze pierced through the walls, casting a glance at the neighboring stone house. The owner of the house was named Colin, a second order of the bronze humanity, a craftsman responsible for making stoves and also a student of the priest of Hestia's temple, the goddess of fire and protection. Of course, the key point was, he was the bronze human who had refused Lane's request to stay. Chapter 197. The reason he had coincidentally chosen him before was that, in Lane's perception, he was the one with the highest aptitude among the nearby humans. Yet even so, Colin's ability was actually quite limited, at least not sufficient to directly bear the power of a divine nature. But now, from Lane's detached perspective, he unexpectedly discovered that a connection of destiny had formed between Colin and Andy at some point. Although this connection was still weak, if nothing unexpected happened, as Lane gave Andy more recompense, the bond would become clearer. Destiny is indeed elusive, he said, shaking his head slightly. Although Lane could have solved this issue early on, he did nothing. By the day he left, Andy would no longer be the weak child he was today. By then, he could resolve the trouble on his own. So from that day onward, Lane, having acquired the new identity of priest, did not conceal his existence but openly started teaching Andy the knowledge of drama. In this remote inner-village living area, the sudden appearance of a priest who did not stay in the temple but instead lived in the homes of others was an abnormal situation. Yet, under the influence of the subtle manipulation of the mind, the nearby humans naturally accepted this fact. They were just somewhat envious that a moment of kindness had brought Andy an unexpected gain. But that was as far as it went. At that time, the meager spiritual and material life had not given bronze humanity a clear understanding of class. Their envy towards Andy was mostly because he could engage with new things unfamiliar to ordinary people. Compared to their monotonous lives, the novelty and adoration brought by these special skills were the sources of humans' desire for the craftsman class. In this manner, more than 20 years passed in the blink of an eye. Good morning, It looks like this year's harvest is quite good. Yes, thanks to the Creator's blessing. Clothed in a hemp robe and walking on the cobblestone path, Andy, now a young man, greeted the familiar passersby. Over the decades, the settlement of bronze humanity had been reconstructed multiple times, even splitting into several smaller outposts that occupied the more outer regions of the plain, and Andy had moved his home along with them. Compared to the past, his new home's neighborhood was busier by no small measure. Although it was still not at the heart of the tribe, it was no longer on the periphery. After all, as a performer of puppet shows, Andy now held a modicum of fame in the vicinity, to the point that even many nearby temple priests came all the way just to enjoy his performance. Especially the opera Titan War Part 1, in which Andy used puppets to represent the gods, narrating the story of how the king of all gods was born in a cave with help from destiny, secretly grew up, befriended various deities, and eventually, with the aid of the ancient gods, rescued his siblings. His performance was lifelike and convincing. It must be said that despite significant deviations from the truth, it seemed quite believable at first glance. Moreover, humans of that time hadn't experienced such epic crossing art. They were astonished, and Andy was consequently pursued as a celebrity, carrying the sense of being the first star of those early days. Indeed, more than one priest who had seen An's performance said they would report An's existence to the high priest of the great temple, so he could present this play to the gods at the annual grand ceremony. However, for some reason, after they returned to their dwelling, they would inexplicably forget about this matter. But that was of no consequence. After all, offering dramatic performances to the gods wasn't something the priests were as enthusiastic about as they imagined. It was merely a way for them to showcase their devotion. If they remembered, well and good. If not, it did not matter. Moreover, many priests felt the performing arts should be exclusively for their enjoyment, having what others didn't have set them apart from ordinary people. Some even thought there should be deliberately established rules about what only priests could possess, that which others should not use casually, to reflect the nobility of those near the gods. Still, since the Creator was indeed still around, in the end, no one brought this matter to light. Andy knew about this, but to him, it didn't much matter who the audience for his performances was. "Uncle Colin, good morning. I didn't expect you to come back here today." As he turned a corner and nodded a greeting to a few more bronze individuals, Andy unexpectedly saw his old neighbor. He paused briefly before cheerfully calling out a greeting. It was quite a coincidence that, being craftsmen themselves, even after moving to a new place, they didn't live too far apart from each other. They were just no longer neighbors. Humph! However, faced with An's enthusiasm, all he received in return was a cold snort. Colin gave Andy a chilly glance. His lips moved as if he had something to say, but eventually, he didn't speak and turned his head to leave. Sigh! With a sigh, seeing this, Andy said no more. After all, it wasn't just a day or two that Colin had an issue with him. Initially, there were just some disputes. But as An's fame grew, Colin's resentment intensified. Like how among priests, those responsible for the annual sacrifices in the great temple normally had higher status than others, and those serving the divine king even more so, it was the same among craftsmen. Seeing that because of a momentary choice he had missed out on a windfall, Colin dared not lash out at the unfamiliar priest, but that didn't prevent him from targeting Andy. Chapter 198. However, this kind of targeting seemed fruitless, and thus, in recent years, as An's fame grew higher, even the Colin family seldom returned home. Fortunately, the construction of hearths in this era was inherently difficult, whether they were household bronze or communal stone ones, and they couldn't be completed within small rooms. Therefore, even if he lived at the place where he worked every day, it hardly affected Colin's life. "Mr. Lane, I have returned." Having walked some distance, his home was now in sight. Still, Andy first knocked on the neighboring courtyard gate and then greeted with a respectful tone. "Come in, the door isn't locked." Creak. Upon hearing that, Andy pushed open the wooden gate and stepped into the courtyard. Since moving to a new place to live, Andy and Lane naturally became neighbors. Although as Andy learned more and more, his time spent performing alone outside was becoming longer, he always remembered to visit his teacher first each time he returned. even though the other party had never formally acknowledged him as a student. "Mr. Lane, this is a specialty of Giantwood Town. I've brought some back especially for you." Entering the courtyard, Andy spoke with a smile, looking at Lane, who was sitting and reading in a reclining chair. The term town was merely a description of a new settlement, nothing like the villages and towns of later eras. Giantwood Town was a newly established small settlement named for its proximity to an ancient forest. As for the so-called speciality Andy brought, it was the heartwood of those ancient trees, which was perfect for making wooden carvings. "You are considerate." Nodding, indicating Andy to set down the items, Lane shifted his gaze from the book in his hands. "Since you are here, as usual, tell me about your journey. Over the years, your reputation has indeed grown. It's all thanks to Mr. Lane's teachings. Otherwise, I wouldn't have reached where I am today." Andy's tone was sincere, without any hint of self-satisfaction. He was very clear about the source of his success today. Andy then recounted to Lane his recent experiences on the road, including the reasons behind the establishment of Giantwood Town, the dirt roads connecting several residences, and the cars pulled by livestock that could be used for transportation. In the past, only the sun god and moon god were said to have their divine chariots, one supposedly born in a previous age, the other several decades ago, but now the human tribes also had their own vehicles. On this trip, Andy had the chance to experience them. However, perhaps because the craftsmanship was not yet perfected, he found it rather bumpy, whereas the people traveling with him greatly enjoyed this novel contraption. Speaking of which, Mr. Lane, I don't know why, but there have been several acts of disrespect towards the deities recently. As if recalling something, Andy couldn't help speaking out. Some actually believe that it's not necessary to expend so many resources on worshipping deities, insisting that humans can live well enough on their own. Don't they know that it is the existence of the gods that keeps natural disasters at bay and prevents the increasingly numerous monsters from approaching human settlements? At this point, Andy also found it hard to understand the thinking of those people. On this long journey, he had learned much that was difficult to come across while staying in the center of the Aurora Plains, like just how dangerous the world could be beyond human activity. Giant eagles with control over light, water monsters that could cause rivers to overflow, and colossal beasts standing dozens of meters tall. Some had been tainted with divine blood scattered during the God Wars, while others contained special cursed substances in their bodies. They were nothing like the docile and harmless livestock humans were accustomed to. Although Andy now actually didn't fear them, having ways to scare off those creatures, he also knew the great danger they posed to ordinary people. Without intervention, an average human would be no match for them. Today's towns expanding from human settlements were all established under the guidance of the Creator, and after the Temple of the Gods had been constructed, the new towns were able to settle down safely. The monsters naturally feared the divine aura left in the god statues and thus kept away from human settlements. It was knowing this that made Andy deeply understand that humans actually couldn't do without the gods. People always adapt, Andy, and modern humans are protected too well. They don't understand how dangerous the world is, nor how hard-earned their current lives are. Shaking his head slightly, unlike Andy, Lane was not surprised that someone would have such thoughts. "By the way, how's your new play coming along?" "I haven't got much of a clue yet. I want to recreate the life of the golden humanity through puppetry, to let people understand the lives of the previous generations of humans, but there are too few records of that era. Even the Creator seldom talks about those times. It is said that back then, the humans' thoughts were restricted." Saying this somewhat anxiously, Andy also felt rather helpless. He, of course, could whip up something on a whim, but Andy did not want to indulge in such self-deception. "Don't worry, you can finish Titan War, Part 2, first. As for the Golden Age, maybe in a while you might actually bump into a golden human." Smiling reassuringly, and as if he remembered something, Lane handed a blank notebook to Andy. "Here, this is for you." "What's this? Why are there no words in this book?" Curiously taking it in his hand, Andy was a bit curious. He had seen books before. As early as in the Golden Age, humans had already learned simple papermaking techniques, but it was never widely used. Humans' demand for paper stemmed from the need for extensive writing, meant for communication and knowledge dissemination. However, the currently settled humans who were without offspring temporarily had no such need. Moreover, compared to paper, stone carvings and sheepskin had a clearly longer lifespan. This is for you, an endless blank notebook. You can write your plays in it. Compared to scrolls, it's more portable and easier to write on. Waving his hand, Lane leaned back in his recliner. All right, that will be all. You've been out for a long time, hurry back and rest. I won't take up more of your time. Speaking with Mr. Lane, how could that be a waste of time? Smiling in response, Andy also got ready to leave. As he approached the gate, just as he turned to close it, a sudden sense of reverie overtook him when he looked at Lane, lying in the shade of the trees. The ages of the bronze humanity when they were created were not all the same, even those created in the same batch. On this trip, invited to perform far away, he saw a human who had started to show signs of aging. Gray hairs appeared amongst the dark ones, wrinkles lined the face, and the strength was no longer what it used to be. Looking at the other, for the first time Andy felt a reverence for time and life. He did not know if he would end up like this, although Mr. Lane had said that he would have a long life ahead of him, but still, his emotions fluctuated somewhat. But Mr. Lane was different. Over 20 years had passed, and he seemed to be unchanged since their first meeting, not even by the slightest degree. It is said that priests can gain the deity's special favor. Maybe that's the reward Mr. Lane has received. But then again, which deity's priest is Mr. Lane? No sooner had this thought flashed through his mind than it was subconsciously dismissed. Andy closed the door behind him and walked towards his own dwelling place. The physical exhaustion was secondary. This journey had truly made Andy feel a bit of mental weariness. Now, he planned to get a good sleep. Andy returned to his small courtyard, and even in his dreams, he was haunted by the history of the golden humanity. The encounter with a golden human Lane mentioned, he took it as a joke because everyone knew the golden age had long since perished. But what he did not know was that, just moments apart, not far from Giantwood Town, a man wrapped in animal skins was staring blankly at the primitive wooden walls in the distance, lost in thought. Chapter 199 Ranks. Alone, Cohen walked across the wild lands for decades. Decked in stars and moon, day and night, he crossed mountains, traversed wastelands, went through forests, waded through rivers, and once even crossed a desert, forded a swamp, and faced down thunderstorms. Unlike before, the landscape of chaos had become increasingly varied and dangerous. He had seen a 9-headed serpent as tall as a mountain and killed a giant worm lurking beneath the sands. Throughout his journey, even though the power derived from a special substance had stopped increasing after a while, the energy emanating from within him had grown considerably stronger. Gradually, after defeating a 2-headed monster bird capable of spitting thunder, Cohen started to explore, in addition to his travels, what exactly this energy born from his flesh and blood was, how to enhance it, and how to use it better. But Cohen had no teacher, and no one could be his teacher in this area. He was the first and so far the only one. Thus, he had to study alone, and his only reference was the golden colloids integrated into his body. Although most of the information it transmitted was useless, there was still some valuable content. With this knowledge, Cohen gradually understood the essence of some powers, especially the most crucial breakthrough that had occurred within him. On the day Mount of the Gods collapsed, Cohen had broken through his bottleneck in a crisis, advancing his internal energy further. And the most intuitive manifestation of that breakthrough was that his physique could to a certain extent touch upon the law. At first, Cohen didn't know what the law was, but the knowledge infused by the mysterious substance remedied his lack of understanding. And the 2 unexpected beings he encountered a few years ago further resolved his doubts. Of course, this also shattered the sanctity of the gods in his heart once again. The realm of the transcendent, legendary It's quite an ironic title. Compared to the socially laden term legendary, Cohen preferred the simplicity of using numbers to describe his power. He called the initial state of his energy first order, the state where the energy could briefly boost his physique second order, and the domains where he could extend it to external objects or wound people through the air, third order and fourth order respectively. As for advancing further, the domain called Transcendent and Legendary was naturally referred to by Cohen as Fifth Order. Now, he felt that he must have made another breakthrough, which that person called High Order Legendary, also the last step before self-born divinity. To Cohen, however, he simply termed it as Sixth Order. Yet at this point, he once again felt he had encountered an insurmountable obstacle. Cohen didn't pay much attention to this, considering that, from what he had experienced in the past few years, there were few beings on Earth who could be his match. Heading east all the way until today, the new generation of humans he had been searching for was right in front of his eyes. But Cohen was somewhat unsure what to do for the moment, whether to speak to them directly or to observe silently for a while first. "Hey, the one up ahead!" In the midst of his contemplation, a call came from behind. Cohen was startled at first, but quickly realized they were calling out to him. Perhaps due to the long gap between eras, although the language used by the other party also originated from the Golden Age, there had been quite a significant divergence. However, with careful listening, he could still make out what they were saying. "Where are you from? What are you doing standing here? Looking like that? Have you run into trouble in the wild?" Turning around, Cohen saw, not far off, a young man looking at him as if examining a rare animal. The stranger in front of him was wrapped in animal skins but had no dust on him. He looked somewhat disheveled yet gave off an indescribable sense of oppression. Although there are contradictions among today's bronze humanity, there hasn't been any malicious incident of attacking each other. Therefore, even though Cohen didn't look easy to provoke, the young man wasn't afraid of him at all. "What are you standing there for, stupid? You must not be from Giantwood Town. I haven't seen you." Walking forward, the young man unaffectedly patted Cohen's shoulder. Yes. I came here for some business." Trying to mimic the other's accent, Cohen nodded in response. Feeling the touch on his shoulder, he felt awkward, yet somewhat nostalgic. Over the years, Cohen had grown accustomed to retaliating against any being that touched him, for there had rarely been a secure place along his journey. But in this moment, suppressing his instinctual reaction, he was reminded of past friends. Hua, the historian of the Golden Humanity, had once bantered with Cohen in the same way. Now, the only trace of him that remained was likely in Cohen's memory. "Then you must be late. Mr. Andy has already returned to the center of the plains. It's said that place will soon be renamed. To differentiate it from the town where we are, the High Priest Mammon suggested calling it a city, named after the plains, Aurora City, and even the creator approved of his suggestion." The young man harbored no suspicion towards Cohen. In his view, Cohen likely came from another small town to watch the Andy play, only to see that Cohen must have encountered some unexpected situations on the road. This was quite normal, after all. The presence of the temple had driven away monsters with extraordinary powers, but those beasts that relied solely on their physical strength were not included. "Come on, since you're here, I'll take you into the town for a look. Although you won't be able to see the play, there's other entertainment today." A fellow who spread disrespectful speech about the gods in public is about to be judged by the priests of the temple. With an expression of eager anticipation for the spectacle, the young man waved Cohen over. "Don't just stand there like an idiot. Go change your clothes first." A disrespectful person toward the gods. I really want to hear what kind of things he can come up with. Disrespectful towards the gods, the temple, priests, and the creator mentioned by the young man. He seized several keywords in an instant, but Cohen refrained from asking blindly. Although he felt a little bad deceiving the enthusiastic young man, he still didn't want to expose his identity. Considering the vanished bodies and collapsed temples, Cohen didn't know what attitude the gods held towards the golden humanity of old, but before clarifying the situation, he planned to act cautiously. Ever since excavating the temple ruins, Cohen felt that his changes were far greater than those in the past few millennia. "Then, thank you very much." Cohen's voice was somewhat indistinct, but the young man didn't seem to mind. "My name is Evans. What's yours?" "Cohen. My name is Cohen." This time, the Golden Human King enunciated his words with clarity. "All right, Brother Cohen. "Follow me this way." Following behind the young man, Cohen stepped into a human settlement once again after many years. Looking around, he felt both unfamiliar and familiar with everything. The skills passed down from the Golden Age could still be seen in traces. However, the attire and speech of the passers-by had changed greatly from the past. Yet, relying on the ability granted by that mysterious substance, Cohen vaguely sensed that the biggest difference in current humans from the past was not their appearance, but their spirit. There were the kind, the hospitable, the upright, but there were also some not like that. Behind their smiles, what was hidden were negative emotions, and many more humans possessed both qualities. Chapter 200 Hephaestus. Mount Olympus, within the Queen of God's bedchamber. Snap! Above Mount Olympus, inside a resplendent great hall, a delicately crafted crystal vessel shattered on the ground. The golden crown wobbled, Hera's chest heaved with intense agitation, and the air around her distorted under the force she unconsciously released. As the heavenly empress who shared divine authority with the divine king, Hera had thought herself to be the most venerable goddess in the world. Especially after learning the mysteries of faith, she believed she could reign eternally with Zeus, instead of fading away like the 2 generations of divine kings before them. But now she found her previous thoughts to be laughable. The divine king had never broken his promise. He truly shared everything with Hera, but he would never seal his words permanently, just like now. The godhood of fertility informed the heavenly empress that another deity was being conceived in the world. And because of her relationship with the new god's parents, Hera felt this very distinctly. Because the source of the new divine bloodline was her husband and her sister. Hera thought she had shown magnanimity by tolerating Eurynomy and the 3 Graces, even ignoring Leto, that frail goddess, but clearly, the divine king thought she could be even more generous. So he turned to Demeter, which was precisely what Hera could not tolerate. Leto, Eurynomy, they posed no threat with their insignificant godhood, but Demeter, now known to humans as the goddess of agriculture, was different. Even knowing that the contract that shared divine authority with Zeus was unbreakable, the heavenly empress still felt a surge of panic. "Zeus, you had promised. What is this?" Suddenly, while the heavenly empress was venting her anger, the laws of her fertility godhood vibrated violently. With a twinge of pain in her belly, almost immediately, Hera realized the crux of the issue. Overseeing fertility was not without its cost. As one of the most special authorities, it influenced the birth of new gods, endowing them with stronger or weaker powers. But it also came with an unavoidable responsibility. Just as Mother Earth had alone borne the 3 ancient gods, now it was her turn. This was supposed to take a very long time, maybe hundreds or even thousands of years, but due to her current rage and resentment, this fate arrived prematurely. With a fluctuating expression, Hera could feel a life being conceived within her womb under the influence of the fertility law and her authority as heavenly empress. And despite immediately noticing this due to her recent emotional upheaval, the embryo was still slightly affected. She did not know whether this influence was good or bad, but Hera felt she needed to prepare for it. When Gaia gave birth to her firstborn son to the Heavenly Father, he was the god of the ocean. Rhea's first daughter by Cronus was Hestia. Although this child was to be born of Hera alone, if his existence disgraced the Heavenly Empress, she could not let him grow up on Olympus. It must be said that in this regard, Zeus was very astute in choosing, or rather creating a queen of gods who valued herself more than her offspring. From their first meeting, the divine king acutely perceived Hera's nature. She might be kind, she might be naive, but when she possessed power and faced the risk of losing it, she would change accordingly. She reserved her affection for herself, perhaps for Zeus too, but it seemed that neither the deity of fire nor the war god had ever enjoyed a mother's love. Aglaea, the heavenly empress voice reached outside the palace, and soon the youngest of the 3 Graces walked into the hall. As a daughter of the divine king born before Hera became the heavenly empress, to demonstrate her generosity, Hera kept the 3 Graces close to her side and even showed extra courtesy to the Oceanid, Eurynomy. Thus, despite clearly being love rivals, Hera now felt Eurynomy and her could be considered somewhat trustworthy, albeit slightly so. "Your Majesty, you called for me?" With a slight bow, Aglaea noticed the broken vessel on the ground. Clearly, the Heavenly Empress had not been in a good mood before. Aglaea, as the hostess of Mount Olympus, the globally recognized Heavenly Empress, I have just been bestowed a responsibility by the world. I will bear forth a deity on my own, as Mother Earth did before, as a response to the world's favor towards me. Bowing her head, Aglaea remained silent. I will give birth to him as soon as possible. If all goes well, he will become my firstborn son, a member of Olympus. But if something goes wrong, then he is not my child, and you must find him a suitable family. I need you to secretly choose a location in advance and later report to me. Do you understand my meaning? Aglaea certainly understood Hera's intent. Clearly, the Heavenly Empress in charge of fertility sensed something amiss and did not wish her first child to possess any deficiencies, in any sense. In such a case, the seas promised by the divine king himself would be a suitable place. The Heavenly Empress probably didn't trust her brother to handle this matter well, so she decided to leave it to Aglaea's mother, the Oceanid Eurynomy, to deal with the problem. However, more importantly, Hera probably wanted to keep all this hidden from the divine king. As you command, Your Majesty. Chapter 201. Although she didn't want to get involved in this matter, as the youngest and smartest of the three Graces, Aglaea knew she had no choice but to agree. However, thinking about the Olympian god's subtle fear of the god of the ocean, Aglaea felt that perhaps her aunt's family, who lived far away, were more suitable to take on this heavy responsibility. After all, getting close to Poseidon meant she could no longer be favored by King Zeus, so doing something for the Heavenly Empress, she thought they would not refuse. Very well, then you may go. Nodding with satisfaction, Hera did not realize that in such a short time, Aglaea had already thought of a solution. She simply signaled for the other to leave. When she was once again alone in the palace, looking at the empty halls, anger once again surged uncontrollably in the heart of the Heavenly Empress. Her own sister, Demeter, Hera had thought was uninvolved with the world's strife, but, to her dismay, she had betrayed her. As for Zeus, Hera knew that his inability to restrain himself was the root of all problems. Yet she couldn't do anything about him. Hush, stay calm. And this child, was he influencing me just now? Striving to calm her emotions, Hera unexpectedly discovered that perhaps due to the negative emotions she had infused into the embryo, this newly born deity seemed to have a closer connection with her. This gave Hera a vague glimpse of the future, revealing that he seemed to possess divine authority related to the earth and fire. He should not be weak. She breathed a sigh of relief unconsciously. If she could give birth to a normal, powerful deity, that would certainly be best. Yet feeling this connection, the Heavenly Empress couldn't help but recall the source of her negative emotions. A husband, a sister, and the child soon to be born. Zeus. This had better be the last time. Her expression was cold. In just a decade or so, the once bright and kindly goddess seemed to have accepted reality. At this moment, Hera silently made a decision. If there is a next time, she might indeed be unable to do anything about King Zeus, but that was only regarding him. If she couldn't stop her own husband, then she would take concrete actions to show all goddesses that what belonged to Hera could not be taken by anyone. After changing into a set of clothes at Evans's house and tidying up his appearance, Cohen finally no longer looked like a wild man. Even though his demeanor still didn't fit in with the folks of Giantwood Town, passers-by no longer looked at him with strange eyes. Relying on his extraordinary control over his body and sharp hearing, Cohen also quickly learned the accent of the bronze humanity. Now, walking on the street and listening to the exchanges among humans, Cohen gradually gained some understanding of history over the past 1,000 years. The king of all gods was no longer the one from the past. With the fall of Mount of the Gods, the ruler of the world now was the master of the Olympian lineage, King Zeus. Humans had already perished twice over, and according to their sayings, the second generation, the Silver Humanity, also had long lifespans. However, because they did not respect the deities, They lost the god's protection and were exterminated during the gap of the Titan Wars. Cohen made no comment. He had never seen the Silver Humanity, nor did he know whether they truly respected the gods or not. But what he knew was, if reverence for the gods could offer protection, he would not be here now. Moreover, what felt foreign to him was that although the current humans all claimed to be devotees of the gods, their understanding of the deities was not similar to that of the Golden Age. In the Bronze Humanity's descriptions, gods were not omnipotent, flawless beings, but merely entities with mighty powers. Even based on their varying strength, people have categorized the gods into different levels of importance. Beyond that, in front of the temples dedicated to the deities, there exist priests who expound on the greatness of different gods and the benefits one can reap from worship. Yes, although they call it a blessing, Cohen felt it was simply a trade. Humans offer sacrifices, deities bestow blessings. Bronze Humanity thought this was normal, but Cohen found it strange no matter how he looked at it. Maybe this is what gods truly are? Perhaps our previous understanding of gods really differs from the truth. In silent contemplation, Cohen felt as if he had found the answer. Yet, as he looked upon the tall temples and the kneeling humans, he once again recalled the dream that had altered his destiny. It's funny to say, but thousands of years had passed and he still didn't know which deity the self-proclaimed angel in his dream referred to as the Lord. It was as if the being had carelessly thrown some food to the ant beneath its feet out of whimsy and then forgot about his existence. To talk of building temples was out of the question. The being hadn't even left a name. This at times caused Cohen to feel frustrated. But now it ironically served as a pillar for his past convictions. Everything he saw in the ruins made the king of men doubt the gods, but to completely deny the faith he had held for thousands of years, the belief that Golden Humanity had clung to, was somewhat unacceptable to him. Fortunately, Cohen found that there seemed to be differences among these deities. Now, he wanted to know why, even though they are all gods, the past titans, the current Olympian gods, and that unnamed deity differed so greatly. Intuition told him that the reason behind this might just be the answer he had been searching for. "Brother Cohen, why are you zoning out again?" Lost in thought, Evans's voice instantly brought Cohen's attention back. "Sorry. The place I used to live in is quite different from here." Snapping back to reality, Cohen gave Evans an apologetic smile, his face still a bit unnatural. After all, even if it was for self-preservation, hiding his origin from others still contradicted the conduct that the King of Men had followed in the past. It's normal for things to be different. Giantwood Town is near the forest and lacks stone. Apart from the temple, there are hardly any stone structures. It's normal for you to find it new. If you're not in a hurry to get back, you could stay in town for a while, but for now, we've arrived. With an understanding nod, Evans gestured for Cohen to look ahead at a place dense with crowds. "Do you remember what I told you before? You mean those unbelievers?" With just a bit of thought, Cohen recalled what Evans had previously told him. It seems that in Giantwood Town, there are some who are unwilling to offer sacrifices to deities anymore, which undoubtedly angered the priests in charge of the temple. Today, in front of everyone, the priests are set to announce the verdict on their punishment. "That's right, them." Nodding, Evans showed an intrigued expression. In front of King Zeus's temple, the goddess of justice and law's sacrifice will publicly adjudicate the fate of those irreverent ones today. Of course, the Creator once said that the revered goddess always listens fully to both sides in the divine court before making a just judgment. So the priests are following suit, ready to give those unbelievers a chance to speak, and then find and criticize their faults in public. Speaking of which, I've been quite curious for a long time about what they could possibly say. Chapter 202, No Trust. In the spacious open space at the center of Giantwood Town, it was already bustling with people. Directly opposite the temple of the king of all gods, Zeus, a temporary wooden stage had been erected. It was originally prepared for a theater performance that had just concluded, but now it had been expanded, and several additional rows of seats were added. And's performance only required one person, but the judgment of the non-believers had gathered all the town's beings of certain status. The priests from the Temple of Law undoubtedly took the prime position, as they would be the ones to deliver the verdict of this trial. However, judges should not step down into the arena, so the ones who actually scolded the non-believer were the others seated on the stage. By now, half of the chairs in front of the tables on the stage were already filled. They chatted and laughed with one another. The atmosphere relaxed, not taking the upcoming proceedings to heart as the outcome of the trial was self-evident. Humans were created by the gods, and the Creator still exists in the mortal realm. The blessings of the gods are real. They simply could not imagine what speech the non-believer could muster to absolve himself. Instead of a trial, it was more like an entertainment event. Due to that master playwright, Giantwood Town, which was recently built, had seen a massive influx of outsiders. Therefore, in the name of the gods, holding an event under the pretext of judging the non-believers was why the temple's priests were so enthusiastic. They had even thought out the punishment for the poor soul in advance. Let him serve the temple for the rest of his life. After all, there was no death penalty for humans at this time, nor had the gods explicitly stated what to do with non-believers. Most importantly, the man hadn't yet committed any truly blasphemous act. His current actions resembled those of a madman who had suddenly lost his mind, although everyone who had interacted with him felt he was a decent individual. So what exactly did that non-believer do? Did he refuse to offer sacrifices to the deity? Standing among the crowd beneath the stage, Cohen, relying on his superior physique and sense of balance, stood atop an irregular boulder. From there, the entirety of the stage was in clear view. That's not the case. Although there have been some who disrespect the gods by not offering sacrifices, this non-believer is different. Gripping Cohen's sleeve tightly, Evans was also standing at the top of the boulder now. The surface of the stone was very smooth, and without Cohen, he felt that he might fall off at any time. However, alongside the nerves, Evans felt a bit of excitement, which was why he chose to remain up there. It's said that the non-believer doesn't oppose offering sacrifices to the deity. He only opposes having faith in the deity. That's what he seems to say, and it's also why we call him the non-believer. But then again, isn't offering sacrifices to the gods a way of believing in them? Personally, I don't quite understand his thoughts. There are so many people gathered here today. In fact, many are here to see him ridiculed. Everyone is eager to hear how he can offer sacrifices and yet be a non-believer. Nodding, Cohen used his transcendent hearing to glean the sequence of events from the conversations of the people around him while talking to Evans. The reason the non-believer was seized wasn't due to any direct act of blasphemy or refusal to offer sacrifices. Rather, he generally behaved no differently from everyone else. He went to the temple to offer sacrifices at regular intervals and never showed dissatisfaction with the priests. In fact, the one thing he did was to openly question the nobility of the gods in Giantwood Town. He believed that offering sacrifices and having faith were different things. Offering sacrifices was an acknowledgement of the god's power, whereas having faith was an acknowledgement of the god's spirit. However, the non-believer felt that on a spiritual level gods and humans were equals, and there could be no faith between equals. Therefore, while he offered sacrifices to the deity, he also voiced that he did not approve of the deity's guidelines. He worshipped out of recognition of power, but did not believe due to spiritual equality. This behavior made it difficult to directly judge him guilty since his disbelief was tied only to thoughts that couldn't be evaluated, and his actual conduct was above reproach. Thus, the priests decided to conduct a trial, allowing all the onlookers to determine the non-believer's fate collectively. At least until now, that's what they said, and that's what they believed. No need to overthink it. It's just the deluded babble of an ignorant man. The Creator labored to perfection in giving us our bodies, but that was the extent of it. Fools like him always seem to crop up. Waving his hand, Evans looked around, standing at such a great height for the first time. Suddenly, as if he had discovered something, "Here he comes. Look, that's the unbeliever. I thought he would be under guard, but it seems he has come on his own. Let me see." Following the voice, Cohen was preparing to recognize the person. In that direction, a young man in black, with a very friendly smile, was walking toward the high platform. He even had time to greet others along the way. However, It was this young man who caused Cohen's spirit to instantly tense up. Meanwhile, as if sensing Cohen's gaze, the man he was watching also cast his eyes over. Across the short distance, the two men faced each other from afar. "The unbeliever you spoke of, is it that man in black?" Cohen's tone unchanged, but strength had already begun circulating within him. The young man in black looked handsome and had a gentle smile, nothing like the foolish unbeliever of the rumors. In him, however, Cohen felt a subtle sense of threat. Beyond that, there was an emotion that was negative to the extreme. "Yes, that's him." "What, have you seen him before?" Sensing the change in Cohen's attitude, Evans could not help but ask. "Don't know him. By the way, do you know his name?" Ever since he had spotted the other party, Cohen's eyes had not shifted away. This was a dangerous individual, yet if possible, he did not wish to engage with him here. After all, an existence that could make him feel even a hint of threat, even if not a match for him, could easily destroy the small town with the traces of their battle. Clearly, Evans beside him had no idea that both he and the distant unbeliever were such characters. He and everyone else in the town were teetering on the brink of life and death. "His name? It's a bit of a mouthful. Let me think." After a moment's thought, Evans said with certainty, "Mephisto or Mephistopheles. Anyway, they sound pretty similar, who knows?" Now that the man himself has arrived, the trial should be about to begin. I hope this guy doesn't just stand there speechless before the priests. At the very least, he should say something. Don't you think that's the idea? Cohen did not respond. Just arriving in the humans' tribe and crashing into such a special individual, he did not know whether it was coincidence or something else. But it must be said, listening to Evans, Cohen couldn't help feeling a bit of anticipation for the trial to come, despite his wariness. Although he was clueless as to why such a dangerous individual would come to face trial, the reality was such, and Cohen wasn't about to dig deeper. But what kind of statement would such a negatively charged individual make about faith and the deities? On this, Cohen, who was on a journey in search of answers, was very eager to find out. Chapter 203 Trial. Withdrawing his confronting gaze, Mephisto continued on his way. His face still bore a smile, as if nothing had happened. However, clearly, to both parties from the earlier eye contact, the existence of the other was unexpected and could not be ignored. Strange, a demigod perhaps, but not quite. Ordinary demigods don't make me feel threatened. Without divine power, he might be even stronger than me. And what is he here for? Before I came to the mortal realm, I only heard about the existence of wizards, a power controlled by the goddess of the magic net before she ascended to godhood. I didn't expect there to be a different method that allows mortals to wield power. Contemplating internally, Mephisto wasn't overly worried, only somewhat surprised and curious. Previously, when humans lived together, this great demon from the nine hells naturally didn't dare to do anything under the watchful eye of Prometheus. But to his surprise, upon arriving in this newly established town of just a couple of years, he encountered an extraordinary character. The individual possessed divine power, which was why Mephisto initially thought he was a demigod. But after sensing just a bit, he dismissed that guess. The divine power stemmed from the light rain from decades ago, now present within many creatures of the land. Presumably, the human also got his from the same source, but what truly made Mephisto wary was the man's vigorous vitality and formidable physique. He had no doubt that all the tactics available to him in the present world would likely have little effect on the other man, who could easily tear apart those behemoths with divine blood flowing through them, using just his bare hands. Fortunately, it seemed that the man had no intention of fighting him in Giantwood Town. So today's plan would proceed as usual. The priests have been living too comfortably, holding on to the hope that their acts of deceiving the deities would go unnoticed or, even if discovered, not be pursued by the gods. And so, he decided to take matters into his own hands and add a shovelful of dirt to their graves. He hoped that, under the threat of reality, they would make some right choices. Mephisto, let me advise you one last time. If you retract your earlier speech now and pray devoutly in the temple, you can still be forgiven. While pondering, Mephisto's presence became noticed by an increasing number of people. Some came for the spectacle, some held faces of disdain, but all made way for him, opening up a path to the platform. As one of the main characters of the day, no one wished to obstruct his arrival. Perhaps out of goodwill or to ensure the appearance of rules in the trial, when Mephisto reached the platform, a priest dedicated to the goddess of Hellfire sternly issued a final warning to him. I appreciate your kindness, your excellency, but I maintain my innocence. Moreover, I believe that everyone will soon come to agree with my thoughts. His voice wasn't loud but was gentle and determined, and Mephisto's response stirred commotion within the crowd once again. People buzzed with conversation, yet it didn't affect the individual before the platform. He simply stepped forward, looking at the priest blocking his way. May I go up now? In fact, I am quite looking forward to speaking shortly. Since you insist on your view, then come up. I hope you won't regret it. The priest frowned but still stepped aside under the gaze of thousands of spectators, allowing access to the steps leading up to the platform. Thank you. With a polite smile, Mephisto then stepped onto the platform. He stood at the center, in front of him the priests of different temples and those universally recognized as wise. Behind and to his sides, not far off, was a dense crowd of people. The adjudicators of this trial claimed that for a fair result, everyone present, whether on or off the platform, whether a resident of Giantwood Town or not, had the right to speak if they wished, regardless of the side they supported. But everyone knew no one would stand with this unbeliever. It was merely a way to give the audience a sense of participation. And so, as Mephisto stood firmly in the center of the platform, as the buffoon of a spectacle arrived, the host on the platform immediately stood up. A mocking smile on his lips, he looked at the once familiar figure. He was there to preside over this grand event because he was the first to report Mephisto for spreading heretical thought. And the reason he did so was partly personal grudge, although such spite was entirely one-sided in his mind. It appears you are sticking to your own opinion, Mephisto. I must say, your existence truly makes me feel ashamed before the deities. To think that among humans there could be such a faithless person like you, and you don't even seem to feel any sense of shame. People feel shame for their mistakes, but I don't think I'm wrong, and as for you, I don't know. Moreover, you are supposed to be just the host of this trial, right? His tone calm, Mephisto looked in no way like someone about to receive a verdict, but rather like a sage proclaiming his ideology. On the contrary, the one standing before him naturally became the sinner who prevented the spread of truth. You! Unexpectedly faced with a rebuttal, the host was about to say something when he noticed the Temple of Law priest in the center, casting his gaze upon him. As judges, although they did not approve of Mephisto's lack of faith either, they at least had to appear fair and impartial. Taking a deep breath, the host had to suppress his emotions, no longer addressing Mephisto, but turning to the crowd of onlookers instead. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you all know the reason why we are gathered here today. He, Mephisto, a resident of Giantwood Town, and like us, a human created by the gods. He openly admits his disbelief, and thinks that humans should not have faith in the deities, an undoubtedly intolerable wickedness. However, as bronze humanity worshipping the gods, we will give him the right to argue his case fairly in front of the temple, rather than judge him blindly. Now, please be quiet. After saying these final words and the scene fell silent, the host stepped back and looked at a middle-aged man sitting on the left. That was Davos, the priest in Giantwood Town responsible for the worship of the Divine King, said to be a friend of the High Priest Auson. Receiving the host's gaze, he nodded in acknowledgement and then stood up, looking towards Mephisto who stood in the center of the platform. As the person of highest status here, it was proper for him to speak first. Mephisto, as a priest of the Divine King, I cannot understand your lack of faith, for the gods are so magnificent. As a human created by the gods, I equally cannot understand your lack of faith, for they are so benevolent. Now, in front of so many humans, could you elucidate your views to us? Tell everyone the reason behind your disbelief. Perhaps to make the trial more interesting, Davos did not attack with words right from the start. The onlooking crowd seemed to approve of his words. Although they had come to understand the thoughts of this unbeliever through various means, it certainly wasn't as authentic as hearing it from his own lips. Of course, in fact, I have been waiting for quite a while today. Under the scrutiny of the crowd, Mephisto spoke with a smile, yet none of the humans present could understand the underlying meaning of his words. The main reason I stand here today, opposing faith yet not ritual, is because in my view the spiritual and the material do not mix, just like ritual and faith are not the same. The gods possess powers far beyond mortals. They can bring benefits to humans, so humans should rightfully express their respect through rituals, which is beyond reproach, but faith is different. Faith means to recognize all the thoughts of an existence, or to rely on an existence for hope, and in this regard, the gods obviously do not have the qualifications to be believed in. Surveying his surroundings, Mephisto finally reiterated, "The divine king is above all gods, the gods obey him, honor him, but they do not have faith in him, for the relationship between the divine king and the gods is mutual dependency. Without the regular deities, the divine king's throne loses its value. The status of a priest is above that of the common man. People respect you, follow your instructions, but they do not have faith in you, because the relationship between priests and common men is also one of mutual dependency. Without ordinary humans, there would be no need for priests. My denial of faith is not a denial of the gods' power and existence, but rather a denial of their higher status. I acknowledge sacrifice but not faith, because in my view, gods and humans are not one-sided in their needs for each other. There is mutual necessity. Given this, then faith naturally does not have a soil to exist upon." Chapter 204 God and Man. Absurd. No sooner had Mephisto finished speaking than a priest stood up. "Since you admit that gods bestow material blessings upon humans, you shouldn't deny faith. It's outrageous to rely on deities for your current life and yet not want to believe in them. Where is such a good thing?" The onlooking crowd nodded in agreement, reasoning that where there is gain, there should be giving, which seemed fair. Yet faced with the opposition's accusation, Mephisto appeared calm and unruffled. "Your Excellency, I believe you may have misunderstood my words. Besides humans, animals can reproduce. They are born because of their parents and exist during their youth due to their parents. Hence they respect them, but this is not faith. Deities also have descendants, born of their parents, whom they respect, but this, too, is unrelated to faith. I acknowledge sacrifices but not faith because these two are separate and should not be confused. Gratitude towards helpers, awe of power, and recognition of their spirit and actions are entirely different things. Don't you think?" When Mephisto had finished speaking, the high platform fell silent for a brief moment. The spectators, who had expected the unbeliever to utter some laughable remarks only to be easily refuted by them, began to feel, after listening seriously to his explanation, that somehow it made some sense. Indeed, deities are of great help to humans. Without gods, humans might, like ordinary beasts, be running about to avoid monsters with extraordinary powers and have no fixed abode. But gratitude and faith should not be treated as the same, for if one person saves another, the saved does not become the Savior's disciple. "Mephisto, you are just twisting the deity's intentions," said a voice after a while. On the platform stood a tall young man, breaking the calm. He was a priest of the sea god Poseidon, and it was a pity that because of the divine king's edict, humans could no longer approach the sea, and thus the temple of the sea god had always lacked presence. "You think humans can repay the god's blessings with sacrifices without having to believe in them. But what use are mortal sacrifices to the gods? They only care about the sincerity of the one who offers the sacrifices. Gods measure the level of devotion by the number of sacrifices offered by mortals, and it's the devotion that gods cherish. If everyone doesn't believe in gods, then what's the point of offering sacrifices to them? So, you do admit what I said earlier, that there is a mutual value between humans and gods, only that the value provided by humans is not in the material gifts but in the devoted faith? However, if that's the case, I'm afraid this method of judgment isn't quite reasonable." With a smile, Mephisto pointed to himself. "My existence is clear proof. From the very beginning, I believed in no gods, Yet I still presented enough sacrifices, so my dwelling isn't harmed by wind or rain, and my hearth fire burns constantly. Thus, I suggest the gods adopt a new method of judgment. Otherwise, unbelievers like me can also enjoy the blessings of the gods, which somewhat undermines their justice. The priest of the sea god was left speechless. He wanted to say something, but in the end he said nothing. It was a trap. Whether gods needed faith or sacrifices, it proved that gods had demands of humans. If they asked for something, then in certain aspects, gods and humans were placed on the same level. While he could have said, "Then we should believe in gods more to exchange for blessings," the priest of the sea god knew that saying so would be an outright defeat. If gods truly had needs of humans, then the blessings bestowed by the gods should be seen as a trade rather than a blessing. If everyone sought to exchange faith for rewards, then such so-called faith could hardly be described as devout. Faith that arises from profit will naturally end when the benefit ceases. Now, the priest of the sea god felt that today's trial should not have existed. Faith should never be a subject of discussion. What about the Creator, Mephisto? Do you believe in the Creator? Suddenly, someone from below spoke out, perhaps realizing that once faith became a commodity for trade, it would lose its sanctity. That person decisively chose to avoid the topic, instead bringing up Prometheus's existence. The Creator made the bronze humanity, taught humans knowledge, and opened up the wilderness for them, all without seeking anything in return. If Mephisto dared to slander the Creator, no one would tolerate his actions. However, clearly, this was all within Mephisto's expectations. The Creator, of course, I don't believe in him either. Mephisto nodded affirmatively. Before the audience could express their anger, he turned the question back on the inquirer. I believe if you have faith in a god, you should let his thought guide your own. If you truly recognize the Creator's thoughts, then you shouldn't believe in him at all. He built no temples, raised no shrines, nor did he demand sacrifices. It must be said, the Creator indeed deserves human worship, but he just doesn't want us to believe in him. Can I then conclude that those who require human faith are not worthy of it, while those who do not ask for faith are the gods that humans should truly worship? If that's the case, then we should not offer our worship to any deity, and that itself is the standard set by the Creator through his own actions, isn't it? The questioner was at a loss for words, and the faces of the bystanders softened, many of them falling into deep thought. Hearing this non-believer's praises of the Creator did please them to some extent, but what the other party said seemed to make actual sense. If one had to rank the gods, then in the hearts of bronze humanity, Prometheus was undoubtedly the highest, not even the divine king could match him. But just like Mephisto said, the Creator built temples for the gods but not for himself. Could this be proof that a truly great deity indeed does not need the faith of mortals? At this moment, the atmosphere in the area had become quite solemn. The earlier lightheartedness had disappeared, and the humans below the dais pondered upon Mephisto's speech, while atop the dais, an odd atmosphere spread among the priests. To speak of disbelief in the gods, these priests were the true non-believers, but they were well aware that they might not believe, but if all of bronze humanity ceased to believe, that would be an immense problem. The Creator warned them that the gods might not notice the piety of an individual when not present in person, but they could sense the overall swing in human faith. Therefore, Prometheus had repeatedly admonished them to never let the matter of sacrifices become known to the common people. Now, if Mephisto's speech was to be accepted by the people, the gods would definitely discover the arising issues among humans. What would happen then was only known to the heavens. After all, theory is theory, and reality is reality. Just because you speak logically doesn't mean that deities will truly tolerate humans continuing as usual after abandoning faith. As priests closest to the gods, they did not think of the deities as kind and benevolent like ordinary humans did. But he couldn't outright say these words, so Devas decisively stood up. He couldn't tolerate the other party continuing like this. What about the divine king? Mephisto, even the Creator was following the orders of the divine king when he created humans. Do you also refuse to show faith to one of your own creators? Devas didn't think this question would stump the other party. He only hoped that Mephisto would recall the might of the gods. They could create you and they could destroy you. But clearly, his thoughts had once again come to naught. Across from him, Mephisto shook his head slightly. He no longer looked towards the priests on the dais but instead swept his gaze around, making eye contact with every human in the crowd. The Divine King. You're right, indeed he was the one who instructed the Creator to create humans. But if this is the reason to offer faith, it hardly seems compelling. As I mentioned earlier, it is well known that deities can reproduce, but a god does not worship another god. So the offspring of gods might respect their parents, but it certainly has nothing to do with faith. That was also my initial point. We can offer sacrifices to deities to show our tremendous respect for them, but faith is entirely unnecessary. The powers of the gods inspire my awe, but they are far from subjugating my spirit. Moreover, enough! This time, before he finished, Devas's ice-cold tone cut Mephisto off. His expression was incredibly grave, to the extent that everyone could see. He had realized that the person in front of him was likely too difficult to persuade with words. But if possible, he really didn't want to take other measures. Force can't change thought, and faith, after all, is about thought. Mephisto, your mind is indeed sharp, and your speech is quite provocative, but that is no reason for your arrogance. Admit your faults now. As long as you retract your previous words, we can forgive your prior behavior. Staring intently at the young man, Devas tried to make him understand his determination, and he was certain the other had seen his intention. To his disappointment, the other simply responded with a faint smile. I stand by my opinion, honorable priest. Watching Devas, Mephisto spread his hands and calmly said, Seize him. With a cold demeanor, as Devas uttered these words, everyone around was taken aback for a moment. But the next moment, under the intense gaze of his eyes, the two assistants following him approached Mephisto. As a priest serving the Divine King, Devas knew that from this day forward, no matter what became of Mephisto, he had already lost. Now, he could only choose to lose by a lesser margin. Chapter 205 Fire. There was no resistance. Mephisto simply let two mortals, insignificant as ants, restrain him. Watching the scene unfold on the platform, the spectators below erupted into astonishment. Previously, although they found some rationale in Mephisto's speech, decades of experience had ingrained a blind trust in the gods and priests in their minds. They were expecting someone to refute the infidel with more compelling arguments, but unexpectedly, the priests on the platform resorted to physical force. This genuinely surprised the people. In the past, within the human tribes, there was no precedent for using force against one's own kind. So, it appears that since you can't persuade me, you intend to resolve this matter in another way? Expressionless, Mephisto looked at Devas in front of him, a hint of a smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Your Excellence, as the priests of the goddess of law, shouldn't you uphold the fairness of this trial? Or is this a trial where victory is not allowed? On the platform, the faces of the two priests turned sour. They could feel the skepticism from the crowd below, but due to the past prestige of their priesthood, no one yet dared to step forward and interfere. They too wished to maintain the so-called fairness and preserve their image in the hearts of others. But recalling the speech of the infidel a moment ago, the two priests were caught in a dilemma. Mephisto's speech was too dangerous. If he were to win, it would plunge the whole bronze humanity into danger. They didn't know what would happen to the ordinary people, but if the deities were to descend personally, then the priests would be the first to face judgment. With no other choice, they turned their gaze to Devas, who had made the earlier decision. Stop with the rhetoric, Mephisto. Of course, the trial is fair, but instead of lengthy discussions, we plan to resolve this with a more reasonable method, Devas said with a heavy voice, noting the judge's difficult position. Since Mephisto had already been restrained and offered no resistance, Devas's idea of prematurely terminating the trial on the grounds of disrupting order fell through. Clenching his fists, Devas realized there was no other path to take. He did not know whether what he was about to do was right, but either way he had no choice. This dangerous man could not be allowed to continue existing. Let the gods judge you, Devas said coldly. The gods have not specified how to punish those without faith, and we dare not presume. Since that is the case, let the creation bestowed by the gods judge what is right and wrong. If you are right, naturally no harm will come to you. If you are mistaken, then the fire gifted by the gods shall deliver the punishment you deserve. This is the most impartial judgment possible. Standing on the platform, Devas swept his gaze over the crowd of onlookers. Many of them were dissatisfied with the abrupt end of the debate and were resistant to the priests using force. But as Devas linked the trial to the will of the gods, they dared not speak any further. Even those who thought Mephisto made sense did not dare to publicly question the gods. After all, while doubting the gods in one's heart may not show on the surface, openly questioning the deities was a different matter altogether. Most people, after all, remained silent. A creation bestowed by the gods? The smile on Mephisto's face became harder to suppress as he asked slowly, "May I know to what you are referring?" "Fire, of course. The gods bestowed fire upon us to drive away wild beasts, light up the darkness, avert disasters, and bring warmth. It is the most suitable creation to express the will of the deities. If the gods deem you innocent, then you shall remain unscathed. Otherwise, the fire graced by the gods will administer the punishment you deserve. This is the fairest trial there can be." Whether the gods were paying attention to this place or not, Devas believed no one was more aware of it than he was. The gods would not care about such a trivial matter. Hence he had already anticipated the fate of the infidel. He would scream in agony as he died in flames, paying the price for his speech. Devas didn't know how the Creator would react upon learning that he had caused the death of a fellow human, but he imagined it couldn't be worse than the situation at hand. Thus, at his command, a pyre was erected, and the sacred fire from the Temple of Flame was brought forth. They tied Mephisto to the pyre, and from start to finish, he offered not the slightest resistance, merely watching the proceedings with calm indifference. "You have one last chance to recant, Mephisto. Admit your error. There is no need to stir the gods over a mortal's affairs." Raising the torch high, Devas's hand trembled slightly. Though his words were merciless, the reality of taking a fellow human's life made him hesitate. His final warning was in fact a genuine hope that the other would concede, but unfortunately, the outcome disappointed him. "I stand by my views," Mephisto said slowly. "I just wonder if you will be able to maintain yours in a moment." With a twitch at the corner of his eye, seeing there was no turning back, Devas no longer hesitated. He threw the torch onto the pyre, but his feet involuntarily retreated a few steps. In front of him, as the torch hit the ground, the flames roared fiercely. "Why stop me?" In the sky above Giantwood Town, behind a cloud, the sword-belted goddess glared down at the humans below with indignation. She reached out her right hand as if intending to do something, but another hand was already grasping her wrist, halting the unreleased divine power back in its tracks. "It's best not to use divine power in the mortal realm. You know that, don't you?" With a slight smile, Lane said, but he clearly was not answering the question at hand. However, it was obvious that the goddess of justice would not be fooled by his words. "You know what I mean. I'm asking you why you are stopping me from maintaining the fairness of this trial. Mortals do not understand gods, nor does Mephisto quite comprehend them. They think they know all there is to know, but they are completely unaware of the extent of power a deity possesses within their own realm of authority. If the judge of today's trial had been a priest from any other temple, everything would have proceeded as they wished, with no deity paying attention to such a trivial matter. But Themis was different. As the embodiment of justice and law, she noticed everything the moment Mephisto stepped onto the high platform. All of it, including the cause and effect behind today's trial, the great power hidden beneath Mephisto's mortal guise, and even those priests of the Temple of Law who held no faith in her. As for the priests' lack of faith, the goddess did not intend to punish them because she had never actively asked humans to worship her, and the temples she currently has were built out of the respect for the ancient Titan god's power by Zeus and Prometheus. But this trial was different. Since it was a judgment witnessed in her name, even without her permission, Themis would not allow an unfair verdict to happen. He won't be harmed, will he? You should be able to see that, unless Hestia herself took action. Even if the flames of her temple were 1,000 times fiercer, they couldn't harm this fellow. With a slight headache, but still, Lane tried to explain. Obviously, the goddess was not so easily persuaded. That is merely the result, Lane. The fairness of the process is also part of justice. But the premise of you maintaining justice is that someone feels it's unfair. Yet, as it stands, Mephisto obviously delights in it. At that moment, high upon the wooden stake, the flames were already scorching Mephisto's body. A burnt scent carried by the wind drifted into the crowd, prompting many to show expressions of pity and sorrow. Among the bronze humanity who had not suffered adversity, while there were all kinds of people, the majority of them were still kind-hearted. Only when the barns are full do people know to follow the etiquette, and only when the food and clothing are sufficient do they know honor and disgrace. All of this is true now as it will be in the future. Yet, by contrast, Mephisto, who was actually enduring the pain, still maintained his smile. Perhaps you're right, if both parties feel that the outcome is just, then indeed it cannot be deemed unfair. After a long contemplation, Themis finally accepted this reasoning. If an incident has no victims, then for her to insist on maintaining her own so-called justice would mean the forced imposition of justice is probably not justice at all. So, can you let go of me now? Looking at her right hand, Themis spoke slowly. Of course, my apologies for the offense. Lane released his left hand from the goddess' wrist, apologizing with a smile. In this age, bound by the pressing laws of the current world, he too could not casually wield his power. Thus, to stop the hastening goddess, he had to resort to a more direct approach. So these two are related to you? Having reached a consensus on the matter of the trial, the goddess of law finally turned her attention to other matters. Under her divine senses, the two largest anomalies present were clearly visible. If Mephisto was noticed because he actively invaded the goddess's domain, Cohen was discovered entirely because of his failure to conceal. His vast vitality made even Themis frown slightly. This power would indeed be formidable against many of the weaker true gods on earth. This was not merely a matter of strength but also because, stripped of their divine power, few deities knew how to fight. One has some connection to me. In fact, I don't even know how he came to have faith in me when he does not realize that I am the one who created his existence. Glancing at Cohen, Lane decided to have a chat with him when the opportunity arose, of course, not as the creator of the golden humanity. As for the other, he is somewhat related to an old friend of yours. Care to guess who? I guess Cronus. Speaking calmly, she directly named the crux of the matter. Under Lane's surprised gaze, Themis turned her head, looking at this deity she had known for thousands of years. A century ago, during the great upheaval, the mother goddess might suspect the dark overlord, but I never would. No one else could have done it, only you are capable. Chapter 206 Holy Spirits. You guessed right. With a helpless smile, Lane really hadn't expected that Themis not only guessed the answer immediately but also provided such a reason. But then again it made sense. Among the gods of chaos, it was Cronus and Themis he interacted with the most, and it was from them that Lane often heard some truer assessments of himself, unlike with Liana, who always considered whatever he did as correct. For instance, the arrogance that Cronus had pointed out, Lane felt that he had been somewhat alerted at that time. It seems that Cronus is doing well after abdicating, at least not like our Father God. Nodding, Themis looked at the humans on the earth, especially those two who claimed to be priests of the Temple of Law, whose faith in her was so weak as to be almost non-existent, and suddenly asked, "Ordinary people don't know the reason why deities offer them protection, so they waver because of that person's speech, which I can understand. But looking at it now, these priests seem to know. I have never demanded their worship of me, so I don't care whether they believe in me or not. At most, because of their actions, I might from today onwards destroy all temples erected in my name by humans and forbid those so-called priests from acting in my name anymore. But my nephew is different. They clearly know the importance of faith to a god, and they were even just arguing about this with that unbeliever. If they are clear about the stakes, then why don't they believe in the gods? On this matter, Themis really couldn't understand, or rather, not many of the current gods of chaos understood it either. They were still groping their way through the concept of faith. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such cases of blessings being almost explicitly priced for humans. This is primal faith, and without experiencing one or two failures, the gods wouldn't understand how to maximize mortals' belief in them. But to the gods, these one or two failures would cost time, while to the mortals it would cost lives. In the future, it might just be the lives of a few individuals, but right now it means everyone. Because that is human nature, Themis. Fear and awe come from the unknown. Desire stems from never having possessed. Yearning is the farthest from the truth, but conversely, it is the closest to faith. That is why the priests would rather be rendered speechless by Mephisto's words than admit gods created mortals just to receive their faith. Because they only need to look at themselves to know that if everyone learned the truth, what would come would not be more devout worship of the gods. But like them, no matter how pious their words, they can't hide the shallowness of their faith. After all, faith is not something one can have simply by saying, "I will believe, I should believe." People can deceive others, but they can't deceive themselves. With a slight shake of his head, this was the importance of humanity in godhood. However, a keen intuition about fate made Lane feel a premonition that perhaps the Divine King would soon become aware of all this. Of course, that was not the reason for his appearance here today. In fact, Lane had been feeling a bit restless lately. This could be feedback from the origin of spirituality, or perhaps a premonition given by the power of fate. In any case, something unexpected had probably happened. Initially, he thought it was some special change among humans, the core of the next era, but now it seemed that the problem did not lie there. If not there, then it could only be in, "What are you thinking about?" Seemingly sensing the change in Lane's mood, Themis turned her head to ask. "Nothing much." Without a conclusion, Lane didn't plan to say too much, so he simply responded with a smile. "I'm planning a trip to the sea soon, and I might also visit your elder brother on the way." "My elder brother? You mean Oceanus?" "Yes, him." Nodding, Lane softly confirmed. He did indeed plan to visit the god of the ocean, even if just en route, since it was more or less on the way to the other's doorstep. The main body of the current world of chaos was enveloped by the circumterrestrial river around the ocean, which in turn enveloped the earth. At the far end of the east, the ocean deity Sovereign, who had been seriously injured a century ago, remained in his divine palace, uncertain of his current state. However, Lane's destination was even more distant. He had made up his mind, and very soon, he would personally embark on the journey. But what made him hesitate was whether or not to find someone to accompany him. After all, whatever was causing such a strong yet vague premonition surely wouldn't be something simple. At this time, as the two deities conversed in the high sky above, on the earth below, the towering flames had completely engulfed Mephisto. His face was becoming indistinct, but everyone knew that, at the center of the fire, he must still be smiling, looking at everyone just as he had been at the beginning. The atmosphere at the scene was somewhat oppressive. Devos could feel the questioning in the gazes cast upon him. Ordinary humans dared not question the gods, but that didn't mean they wouldn't question him. But at this point, he could not turn back anymore. "The result of the judgment is clear," said Devos, trying to sound righteous and stern. "Clearly, God has proven through the actual outcome who is right and who is wrong. The words of Mephisto are nothing but laughable lies." Devos tried to come across strongly, but the watching crowd paid no attention to his performance. They merely stood in silence, gazing at the burning pyre. Even those who did not acknowledge Mephisto's views were merely watching silently now. If the condemned had screamed in agony or begged loudly for mercy amidst the flames, perhaps they could have felt some sense of victorious joy. But at this moment, all they felt was confusion. Were the actions of the priests really just? "Cohen, do you think what he said makes sense?" Standing on a large stone, Evans had lost the eager expression of a spectator he had had at the beginning. He did not know who was right or who was wrong, but he felt that his goddess Hestia would not have meted out the punishment of burning at the stake to an unbeliever like this. If the goddess would not do this, then the fault must lie with the person carrying out these acts. Right and wrong are relative. That's one of the few truths I've learned over the years, Cohen said slowly. If, to you, whether or not the flames before your eyes are God's will, your faith in God remains unchanged, then he makes no sense. After all, you have proved with your actions that your faith in God is irrelevant to what kind of goddess she is. What if I think this isn't what the goddess intends, but rather the personal thoughts of these priests? Looking at everything on the stage, Evans ultimately felt that the goddess would not do this. She must be, as the Creator said, kind and gentle, extending tolerance to all the weak. If this really was the will of the goddess, he felt he could not accept this reality. Then it just proves that, to you, at least one thing the unbeliever said was right. At least you truly believe in her because you recognize the goddess's thoughts and actions, not just for the blessings she bestows on you. Cohen responded calmly, but his feelings were a bit complicated. Unlike Evans, he knew how terrifying Mephisto was. Since the fire imbued with a hint of divine essence was useless against him, it would be no different for this dangerous individual. But the words of the condemned had indeed given Cohen much to ponder. At least he felt one point was very true. Faith is a spiritual conversion, not merely gratitude. In the past, the golden humanity worshipped gods like that. They believed gods were perfect, omnipotent, and could be attributed with all the goodness in the world. Because the gods were so perfect, they devoutly worshipped the deities and tried their best to draw closer to the god's image. It was for this reason that when Cohen discovered the real gods were so different from what he imagined, a sense of having been deceived naturally arose. The disappearance of the golden humanity's corpses was merely what triggered this suppressed emotion. What's that? Cohen, look quickly. Aroused from his memories by the shouting of Evans next to him, Cohen followed the sound. On the platform, DeVos continued to make futile speeches, trying to salvage his image, and the flames kept burning, thick smoke rising and spreading into the high air. But right in the center of the flames, behind DeVos, a burst of golden light suddenly emerged. It grew from small to large, from faint to bright, enveloping an ethereal figure that slowly ascended towards the sky. That is. No, it's just an illusion. Cohen almost instantly saw through the true nature of the golden light, but amongst the mortals present, he was probably the only one who could see the truth. At this moment, the crowd had erupted into excited murmurs, for they knew that the Creator had told them of humanity's 3 ages, where the golden humanity ascended to the heavens for their noble virtues, and the silver humanity was buried underground for their disrespect towards the gods. And now, right before their eyes, the legendary myth seemed to unfold. Impossible. Alarmed by the crowd's tumult, DeVos couldn't help but turn around. Seeing everything before him, he could hardly believe that the ascension of a heroic spirit from the legends was happening right in front of him, and that he was playing the role of the villain who killed this noble being. And what was most frightening was, since Mephisto had ascended, did it mean that the gods were about to descend upon the mortal realm? Prepare the carriage. I must go see High Priest Asen. By now, the crowd had started to press closer to the platform. The ascension of a Holy Spirit was unfolding before their very eyes, and everyone felt that this was the will of the deities. The priests on the platform had already stepped aside, and after a brief moment of panic, DeVos quickly made up his mind. He decided to head to the expanding Aurora City to meet with his former good friend, now the High Priest Asen. As one of the 2 students most trusted by the Creator, only he could provide DeVos with some solace now. As for meeting with the Creator directly, that was impossible. DeVos now was not quite brave enough to face him. Chapter 207. Divine punishment is imminent. A most ludicrous trial had begun in jest and ended in jest, yet its repercussions were far from over. Mephisto ascended in flames, and almost on the same day, within the entire range of the bronze humanity, all temples devoted to the goddess of law collapsed thunderously. As humans who witnessed the trial returned to their original dwellings, everything about that day spread far and wide. A debate on whether humans should believe in the divine had seemingly received the gods' approval in the end, which was almost unbelievable. But as more and more people came forward to share their experiences and what they saw that day, It seemed that people couldn't help but believe. After all, the ascension might be false, but the collapsed temples were real. However, just as this was beginning to brew, and was still confined to the vicinity of Giantwood Town, a carriage, which was still rare in that era, swiftly entered the residential area freshly named Aurora City. Traveling day and night, through haste and toil, DeVos arrived in just 3 days on a journey that normally took 7, utterly exhausted. Yet, he dared not rest for a moment and quickly made his way to his friend's dwelling. Just now, on the road, he had heard about the Temple of Law collapsing. He didn't know how far things had developed by now, nor how the Creator had reacted to it. Now, all DeVos wanted was to discuss with Asen how to handle the situation before the news reached this place. Or more precisely, if the deities were truly going to mete out punishment to the mortals who deceived them, then they had to think of a way to extricate them first. Make way! Roughly pushing aside the pedestrians blocking the path, DeVos opened the door to Asen's residence. To his surprise, another person was also there. That was Mammon, the high priest who was in charge of officiating over the Divine King alongside Asen. It was normal for the other party to be present, but at this moment, DeVos didn't know whether he should let the other party in on the issue. DeVos? Weren't you in Giantwood Town? Seeing his old friend push open the door, a hint of confusion appeared on Asen's no longer youthful face. We have a big problem. Taking a deep breath and glancing at Mammon, who was also looking over, DeVos hesitated, but still spoke directly. They were all priests, and on this point their interests should be aligned. You must already know about the collapsing of the Temple of Law, right? Do you know the reason behind it? His expression changing, Asen hurriedly followed up. He had been worried about this matter for several days, and gathering with Mammon had also been for this very reason. However, looking at his old friend who seemed to know something, a bad premonition surged in his heart. You mean to say, we're in big trouble? Repeating it once more, DeVos rallied his spirit and began to discuss the cause and effect of the incident. So you mean to say that the collapse of the Temple of Law could very well be due to your use of the goddess's name and the influence on the trials process, and that unbeliever you judged was instead raised to a Holy Spirit in the end? Standing up, Mammon felt somewhat incredulous. As one of the individuals closest to the Creator, he knew all too well. The gods wanted humans to worship them and would bestow various blessings for doing so. But now, someone was telling him that an unbeliever had been rewarded by the deities? It sounds incredible, but on reflection, it seems understandable. Have you ever thought that maybe the goddess of law and the divine king are not deities from the same faction? The Creator once said that at the turn of the Aeon, when the two divine kings waged war, the gods took sides, but the goddess of law did not seem to be on the side of the divine king. Similarly taken aback but then calming down, Asen pondered and slowly made a guess. Because of the temple's collapse, Prometheus let the humans figure out the reason themselves while he set out for Olympus. In truth, he didn't think this anomaly related to bronze humanity. The forethinker suspected that perhaps the goddess of justice had accidentally discovered their trickery and thus expressed her indignation. He intended to visit this lady because, as far as he could tell, it seemed that the goddess had not yet told the divine king about all this, so there was still a chance for redemption. Don't be anxious, DeVos. The Creator will handle this matter. He has already gone to Olympus, and we are still fine now, aren't we? You should go back and rest, it will be all right. In the end, Asen spoke thus. Although hesitating, DeVos truly did not know what he could do. Seeing Asen filled with confidence, he reluctantly suppressed the unease in his heart, ready to rest properly. However, what he didn't know was that, as he watched DeVos's departing figure, Asen's expression instantly darkened. He would not be so naive, no matter how one looked at it. What the other party had said seemed like an omen of some upcoming turmoil originating from the deities. Even if it was temporarily suppressed, it was merely delaying the inevitable. Thinking of this, Asen couldn't help but curse DeVos's foolishness in his heart. How could one take faith and make it a subject of discussion? Sacred things should only be on the altar, not in people's hands. Mammon, what do you think about this matter? After a long silence, Asen broke the stillness with his words. Having known each other for so many years, he knew that the other was not someone like Devos. What else can I think? Just like you said, the Creator will solve the problem. Mammon spoke calmly, his thoughts indecipherable. Yes, whatever happens, the Creator will resolve everything. Asen's tone carried a hint of emotion, almost like a sigh. Unconsciously, his right hand brushed the corner of his eye, where wrinkles had now gathered. More than 20 years ago, he had been so confident, thinking that death was trivial and that he could face aging with equanimity. But when his own body no longer had strength, his thinking began to slow, and his skin lost its luster. He had changed his mind. He wanted to regain his youth and maintain it forever. He had pleaded with the Creator for this, but to his disappointment, Prometheus had refused him this time. After all, Asen was indeed his favored student, but what about the other priests? If everyone came to him seeking immortality, he could not fulfill such a request. Yet by only granting exceptions to a few, he felt he would be doing a disservice to the rest. Therefore, the forethinker tried to satisfy every reasonable request from people, excluding, of course, eternal life. Let us wait then. The Creator will surely resolve everything. I am a bit tired, Mammon. Then I won't disturb you any longer. Nodding in understanding, Mammon, his expression unchanging, left through the grand door. He looked at the sky. Regretfully, he could not see the setting sun or the rising moon. For on this day, the Aurora Plains were covered with dense clouds, looking as though a heavy rain was imminent. What would you do? Having known him for many years, Mammon understood Asen better than anyone else. He truly believed in the Creator, but he trusted himself more, especially since Prometheus had said more than once that he was not powerful among the gods. Even if the matter with the goddess of law was concealed, could the deception of humans toward gods really continue indefinitely? Even if they found ways to curb the spread of the speeches of the faithless, if there was a first time, there would be a second time. I used to think that our generation might not live to see the day of divine retribution. That's not right. Others may not live to see it, but I do not wish to die. Alas, Creator, I am willing to offer you everything. Everything I possess can be yours, with the exception of the life you bestowed upon me. But you are an immortal deity, and I suppose you cannot understand our sentiments. He sighed, unseen by anyone. How shocked he had been when he heard the name Mephisto from Devas's lips. A memory forgotten for decades now vividly resurfaced in his mind. And unlike before, just like Asen, he was no longer young. Chapter 208 Extinguished Fire. In the western part of Aurora City, there was a residential area that wasn't quite at the core. Mr. Lane, have you heard? Just 3 days ago, the entire temple of the goddess of law collapsed. Rushing into Lane's courtyard, Anne's expression was somewhat urgent. He had stayed at home for the past 2 days without going out, and he hadn't expected to hear such news the moment he stepped outside. Over the years, studying drama under Lane had also allowed Andy to understand much of the history unknown to the common people, as well as the true power of deities. The collapse of a deity's temple, did it signify their dissatisfaction with humans? He came in search of the always knowledgeable and seemingly omniscient Lane for answers, but upon entering the courtyard, he found it devoid of anyone. A layer of dust had settled on the tabletop, appearing to have been there for 2 days. Aside from the dust, there was nothing else but an exquisitely modeled wooden puppet. Mr. Lane? Still no response. The doors of the house were open, yet it was completely empty, and even the items Lane often used had vanished. Everything seemed to indicate that he had left this place, and it didn't appear to be a temporary departure. Instantly, a tremendous sense of loss welled up in Anne's heart. He had anticipated today's events, but now that they had actually happened, he felt somewhat at a loss. Lane had mentioned more than once in conversations that he would one day leave this place. Only in the past, Andy had thought that day was far off, but unexpectedly, it had turned out to be today. Probably because of the temple's collapse, Mr. Lane is, after all, a priest. Sighing, Andy looked at the puppet on the table. This was perhaps the gift Mr. Lane left for him. He had previously mentioned that he would leave Andy a gift beyond your imagination before he departed. Andy fell silent for a moment, then gently took hold of the puppet and turned to leave. Whatever it was, it came from the elder who had taught him for decades, and he would definitely cherish it. However, in the next moment, An's body froze in place. As the puppet came into contact with his palm, an invisible lock seemed to be undone. In the past, it had locked away anything abnormal about Lane, with everyone subconsciously ignoring these under the influence of that power. But from this moment forward, it no longer affected Andy. Accompanying this was a message about the puppet. This is. With widened eyes, Andy looked at the toy in his hand. Just now, using the information he received from the message, he understood the secret contained within the puppet, which truly was beyond his imagination. He didn't know whether this message was true or false, but if it were true, "Phew, Andy, don't rush. Your mental strength is not yet strong enough. According to the message, even though you could use external objects, you must first reach the legendary realm." Taking a deep breath, Andy spoke to himself. In these years, in order to multitask with puppet control, Andy had learned the method of meditation. But as a mortal, he couldn't break through barriers in a short time like a deity could, and the meditation he learned was really just that, devoid of other esoteric knowledge. If the realm before legendary was divided into 4 stages, he was now at the pinnacle of 3rd order, still far from the transcendent realm. Andy hadn't been very concerned about power, but now it was different. Mr. Lane, no, Lord Lane was a deity? Murmuring to himself, Andy realized that his never-before-acknowledged teacher was likely not just any deity, but probably one stronger than the creator. After all, Prometheus once said the boundary between mortals and deities was unbreakable. But now, it seemed that it was only because the creator wasn't powerful enough. Clutching the puppet, Andy calmed his excited emotions. Despite witnessing many of humanity's less good affairs over the years, he still retained kindness in his heart. Therefore, although he had received a tremendous boon, he remained concerned about the collapse of the temple. After all, it might signify the deity's discontent with humans, and while he had something in his hand for the future, that was all it was for the future. I should first seek out a priest I know, they should have some information. Making up his mind, Andy left Lane's courtyard. Stepping over the threshold and glancing at the sky, he couldn't help but note that today's meteorology was indeed strange. Dark clouds seemed to press down in the sky, with silver serpents dancing among them, especially prominent above the core of Aurora City, where the clouds were particularly thick. An invisible oppression weighed on his mind, and Andy shook his head to dispel the feeling. After all, that was the safest place for human tribes, and though he had never been there personally, Andy was well aware of what stood there. It was the dwelling of the Creator and the temple of the Divine King. The color of the sky had darkened, the clouds gathering even more, and the streets were devoid of people. In weather that looked like a heavy rain was imminent, everyone was reluctant to venture outside. Scattered lights flickered in the now quiet human tribes, bringing a glimmer of light to the pitch-black night. After Mammon left, Asen donned a layer of black clothing and then silently stepped out of his room. Chapter 209. Standing on the street, Asen looked back. This was the wooden hut he had lived in for decades, built together with the Creator. At the time, it served as an example for other humans, with Prometheus teaching them how to construct shelters, and Asen had always taken pride in residing there. But after this, he probably wouldn't have the chance to live there again. But there's nothing that can be done about it. With a sigh, Asen felt somewhat sentimental. You are neither the strongest deity, nor can you anticipate every outcome. I am truly grateful that you created me, but that's not a reason for me to accompany you in death. No, the only one who will die is me, you all will never. The voice started off faint, as if trying to persuade oneself, but then it turned to grinding teeth. At some point, Asen found himself growing more and more envious of the deities. So envious it bordered on resentment. Eternal life, immortality, power, physical beauty. They looked so much like humans, and Asen couldn't really see any difference between them. If there must be a distinction, it's merely that the deities were better off from the moment they were born. After all, they were gods from the day they emerged. Who? This is why faith cannot be questioned. Some fools just can't understand this concept. Suppressing his churning emotions, Asen chuckled self-deprecatingly. Look, he was the proof. Despite being the human who received the most and greatest blessings from the deities, he was the one who believed in them the least. In the past, he enjoyed the feeling of fooling the deities. Now, he was about to betray his own creator. Sometimes Asen felt very despicable indeed, but there was no helping it. That's just the way the world is. As long as you have value, you can live well. Whether you are noble or despicable isn't that important. Just like right now, he was the high priest at the pinnacle of the bronze humanity, wasn't he? But now the time had come for change. Once, his intelligence made him distinct from other humans, a value to the Creator. Today, it was time to show his value to the other gods. Of course, all this was predicated on the condition that they could offer him what he desired. The time is almost right. Clenching his fist, Asen reaffirmed his resolve and headed towards the heart of the tribe. The clouds overhead thickened, making the air seem oppressive. Perhaps it was the calm before a heavy rain, as there was no sign of wind along the way. With the help of the light from fires inside the houses on both sides of the road, Asen's eyes, which were not as bright as before, could barely make out the path. He had walked this road many times before, but this time it felt exceptionally slow. The closer he got to the front, the brighter the surroundings became, because this was the core of Aurora. Here, the sacred fire for worshipping the deities used animal fat as fuel, burning continuously throughout the year. Even at night or during rainy nights, there were people constantly watching over it, ensuring that there was no risk of it being extinguished. High Priest. Lord Asen. Okay. High Priest. Gradually, Asen came across some acquaintances on the road, and he greeted each one with a nod. As the most central hall of the gods, naturally, there would be people watching over it even at night. Those responsible for guarding the temple were somewhat puzzled by Asen's late-night visit, but they didn't think too much about it. After all, he was the high priest, and with the recent collapse of the goddess of Law's temple, Asen's coming here to pray to the deities didn't seem out of the ordinary. Moving forward, thus, Asen slowly arrived in front of the temple where he had worked for many years. Looking up, even at night, the grand and majestic temple remained solemn and dignified, and it glowed with a faint luster, which was the result of divine power penetrating from within the statue inside. Here, the power of faith, divinity, and elements merged to create something that seemed to cause a wondrous reaction, giving rise to a kind of power similar to divine power, but much weaker, though not suppressed by the laws of this world. If Asen had been from hundreds of years later, he would perhaps have recognized that every inch of the temple had been sanctified. It had acquired a slight, extraordinary attribute that could restrain some things imbued with negative energy. At the same time, the ability of spiritual bodies to phase through walls, disregarding the physical, also didn't work here. Like material life, they would be kept out. Even the corresponding surface spirit realm seemed different from other places. High Priest. Upon seeing Asen's figure, the two young men guarding the gate greeted him in unison. All right, don't mind me. I will enter through the side door. Asen waved his hand, stopping the young men from opening the main gate, and after thinking for a moment, he turned and instructed. Later on, I will use the method taught by the Creator to communicate with the deity, trying to solve the collapse of the goddess temple. No one should disturb me, remember? I mean no one. Yes, High Priest. The young men answered respectfully. Good. Nodding, Asen no longer hesitated. He walked to the side, entering the temple through the small door used by the cleaning staff on regular days. Pushing open the side door and carefully closing it behind him, the spacious interior of the great hall amplified the sound of his footsteps and the opening and closing of the door. Asen didn't light any lamps, choosing instead to walk inside, guided by the faint light from the skylights. Soon, when he reached the innermost part of the great hall, Asen looked up at the tall statue of the deity in front of him, lost in thought. In the past, he had made numerous sacrifices to the divine king here and had carried out similar acts in other temples, but every prayer was for things that were insignificant to him personally. Chapter 210. He longed for immortality, for power, yet the promises the divine made to mortals held no such clause. They granted fire, calmed the winds and rains, ensured bountiful harvests, but none would grant life to mortals. Only you are the exception, Reverend Master of the Thousand Thunders, King of all gods. Only you understand our prayers. There is little in this world you cannot grant. You have not set limits to the rewards, but you have given us hope to achieve all. With hope and praise, just as in every time past, Asen began to chant aloud the poems that depicted the divine king. Now he should demonstrate his worth to the divine king. Zeus, O mighty deity of great honor, immortal Zeus, I pray to you, offering proof of recompense. Supreme monarch, through your head reveal the sacred, the mother goddess of the earth, the roaring mountain shores, the ocean and the stars arrayed across the sky. Great Zeus, son of Cronus, he who holds the lightning, sovereign of all ages. You are the origin of all, the beginning and the end of everything. O shaker of the world, the beginning of growth and purification, wielder of lightning, thunder, and the thousand thunders, king of all gods. Great Father God Zeus, please hear me. Your most faithful servant implores you. Please grant me eternal life, a noble status, and a might worthy to serve before you. As the poem trailed off, Asen felt, as before, the gaze of the deity descend upon him. Lately, due to the frequent sacrifices, the gods often neglected the offerings of mortals. But this call in the dead of night caught the attention of the divine king. After all, this was the first midnight sacrifice, and he intended to listen, to hear what this mortal dared ask for: immortality, status, and power, and by what right. Feeling the divine king's gaze, Asen prostrated himself on the ground. His heart pounded fiercely, but he appeared devout and fervent. He began to recount, to tell of his reverence for the gods, the position of the Creator among humans, and how Prometheus had conspired to deceive the deities. At first, he did not wish to collude with such a scheme, but the Creator's vast renown among humans and the glaring disparity in their power made it inevitable. It wasn't until today, when the despicable son of Iapetus finally offended the goddess of law with his arrogant actions, that he at last had the chance to relay the whole story to the divine king. In the end, kneeling on the ground, Asen spoke aloud. Supreme King of all gods, as you have promised, there is little in this world you cannot grant me. The secret I bring shows my devotedness to you. Please grant me immortality as promised. Asen was full of confidence, for it had always been so. The deities were far on Olympus, unable to discern one person's devotion. Since they measured faith through sacrifices, then the secret he offered was the most solemn sacrifice in this world. The faint light streaming through the sky window shone on the figure of Asen prostrated on the ground and also revealed Zeus standing behind him. Someone prayed to him and he listened. They yearned for his presence, and he appeared. The divine king manifested his power in the mortal world. The law roared towards him, but none of this could overshadow the fury in Zeus's heart at this moment. He was expressionless, slowly surveying his surroundings. The resplendent temple appeared solemn and dignified, but at this moment, it seemed somewhat ironic, as everything was but a facade for deceit. Finally, Zeus looked down at Asen kneeling before him. Regardless, as the king of all gods, he indeed should be clear in reward and punishment. He knew that this man was not loyal, but he still had some utility. The king of all gods silently resolved that as long as this mortal held a shred of faith in him, he would bestow eternal life upon him and use his existence to proclaim the divine king's mercy and fame among future humans. But after sensing for a while, the outcome was surprisingly contrary to expectation. Up to this point, the high priest kneeling on the ground hadn't perceived anything that had transpired. He waited, full of anticipation, for the deity's blessing, but the divine king, no matter how hard he looked, couldn't see a trace of faith in him. All he could see was this contemptible mortal's belief in himself. Devotion. Ha, I understand now. It seems I was wrong, we were all wrong. This is what faith truly is. With a sneer, as thunder cracked, Asen, oblivious to it all, was reduced to cinders. An invisible force acted upon his body, which would now perpetually maintain its current state, prostrated at the center of the temple. The gaze pierced through walls, watching the human cities prospering under the blessings of the deities. And the divine king's rage surged even more. He wanted to destroy these pitiful lives, even though the vast majority knew nothing of it. Lightning gathered in the sky as if it would strike down any moment, but then he restrained himself. Not only because Zeus had regained a trace of sensibility, but also because he had a better idea. Humans could be obliterated at any time, but the chance to deal with Prometheus might only come once. If there were a next generation of humans, he did not want to see this forethinker who enjoyed being among them. His very existence was the greatest obstacle and competitor for the gods to gain faith. So Zeus would give him an opportunity to further his defiance of the divine court, if he truly loved the humans he created as much as he proclaimed. Therefore, the divine king no longer resisted the suppression of the laws of the present. His avatar sent through the void perished instantly, even affecting his true form. But at the same time, with a thunderclap, the decree of the divine king took effect. At that moment, the voice resonated, centered in the temple, centered on the Mount of the Gods, in the ears of all people and gods. Whether asleep, awake on the ground, or in the sky, they all heard Zeus's indifferent voice in the thunder, all the causes and consequences, along with the divine king's brief judgment. From this day forward, withdraw the fire granted to humanity.